Chapter 84. Indeed, after killing, one's body will more or less be tainted with the aura of resentment. It is most obvious in the beginning, and people with sharp senses will be able to detect it. It will only disappear after a day or two. However, this does not mean that the aura of resentment has disappeared, but has become less obvious and cannot be seen or touched by ordinary people. After being tainted for a long time and accumulating, the aura of resentment will affect one's fate. There are demons who have killed countless people. If one does not know how to neutralize the aura of resentment, even drinking cold water will cause one's teeth to get stuck. This resentment cleansing spell is precisely a spell that can eliminate the aura of resentment. A look of realization flashed across Ziyue's eyes. This resentment cleansing spell not only recorded the method of cultivation, but also the origin and influence of the aura of resentment. It was an eye-opener for him. It's not that difficult to cultivate. After carefully comprehending the records, especially the visualization method of this spell, Ziyue's mental strength surged and instantly sketched a complicated rune in his mind, followed by a second rune, a third rune. The moment the 5 runes were completely sketched, the spiritual energy in Ziyue's body was immediately affected, and a total of 50 streams of spiritual energy directly surged into the rune that he had sketched. Buzz. A special green light appeared directly. Ziyue's heart skipped a beat, and he directly controlled the green light to descend on his body. In an instant, Ziyue felt his body lighten, as if something had been directly destroyed and dispersed. An extremely cool and refreshing feeling involuntarily surfaced in his mind. I did not expect to succeed on the first try. Ziyue raised his eyebrows in surprise, and he felt a kind of joy in his heart. It was just one spell, but it made him feel as if his body and mind had been baptized. It made him feel as if he had an otherworldly aura. Although this spell does not help me in battle, it is still quite useful. It can even be used to expiate the souls of living beings. It is definitely a miraculous spell. Of course, perhaps it is also because I have too few spells. Ziyue muttered in his heart, laughed to himself, and then really went down the mountain. But soon, his expression became serious. He wasn't worried about Zhao Gongyi being killed in the ambush. He was clear about his identity. Since the other party was prepared to do this, they wouldn't dare to make it public. Therefore, very few people should know about it. As for the Guozhengyang that Zhao Gongyi mentioned, Ziyue narrowed his eyes. If he was smart enough, he should know that revealing this matter would not do him any good. On the contrary, it was the old Shiocai temple attendant who made him feel uneasy. I have to find a way to find out more about that old scholar. After returning to his residence, Ziyue made up his mind. Fortunately, the Scorching Sun Gang was the largest gang in the area. Even if it was only a branch, it still had its own intelligence department. It belonged to the Law Enforcement Hall and was called the Secret Records Pavilion. It recorded many strange stories over the years and some of the life experiences of various important people in the town. Ziyue wasn't sure if the old scholar's description was among them, but there was no harm in checking it out. Thinking of this, he didn't stay any longer and directly walked out. Just as he arrived at the entrance of the Scorching Sun Gang's branch, he happened to see Guozhengyang coming out. The moment Bai Ziyue's eyes met his, he immediately saw the disbelief and fear in the other's eyes. It could be said that the other's expression was extremely complicated. Soon, Guozhengyang seemed to have thought of something. He hurriedly lowered his head and carefully walked past him, quickly leaving. As expected, Ziyue smiled coldly and ignored him. He directly stepped into the Scorching Sun Gang. The Secret Record Pavilion was located in the west court of the Scorching Sun Gang. Because it belonged to the Law Enforcement Hall, very few ordinary disciples came here. Of course, this was also related to the fact that they were not qualified to look at the information. Ziyue had been here a few times, but most of the time, he read about strange secrets and introduced ghosts and monsters. Perhaps because he didn't have enough authority, he could only see some of the things that the public knew. The truly mysterious and strange things were on the second floor of the Secret Records Pavilion. Only the person in charge and above had the qualifications to look at them. After registering at the entrance of a secret records pavilion and deducting the corresponding 10 contribution points, Ziyue had half an hour to look through the information. Without wasting any time, in a relatively spacious room, Ziyue directly found the records of people in Town. There were thick and thin books, and there were over 100 of them. After spending the time it took for a stick of incense to burn, Ziyue finally found the records of the old scholar. Only then did he discover that the old scholar's name was Zhou Xiangue. He was originally from family that ate well. His family had nearly 100 acres of land, enough for him to study. He also worked hard and became a scholar at the age of 20. He wanted to continue working hard, and his family was also looking forward to it. Who knew that at this time, he would be fascinated by immortal cultivation. He would travel all day, visit immortal cultivators, and even go to famous mountains and rivers in search of immortality. He did this for 3 years and spent a lot of money. Coincidentally, his family encountered a great change. His parents died of illness one after another, and his family declined. Forced to make a living, he first worked for the original temple attendant at the Lugang Temple on South Street. Later, when the Lugang Temple was abandoned, he transferred to the Earth Temple on Heavy Ink Mountain. There's indeed very little information about the old scholar, but I can still find some information from it. Dua silently pondered, his thoughts floating. When the old scholar became a scholar, he was stimulated by something and desperately wanted to become an immortal. Of course, this kind of thing was actually not uncommon. The immortal cultivation method was said to be able to live a long life. There were naturally many people who yearned for it, even more than those who practiced martial arts. But those who really had the opportunity to cultivate the immortal cultivation method were few and far between, far less than 1/10 of the total number of martial arts practitioners. Thinking about it carefully, Yue was able to obtain the purple Qi Divine observation technique by chance and was now successful in cultivating it. It was definitely a great opportunity. The old scholar's 3 years of immortal cultivation obviously did not yield any results. Even if he did, it was definitely very little. So, he really stepped into the ranks of the immortal cultivation method, should be, when he was at the Lugang Temple. Through some deeds, Ziyue quickly made some discoveries. He then hurriedly got up and began to search for information about the Lugang Temple, of course, including who the temple attendant was at that time. After an hour, Ziyue silently left the secret records pavilion. The incense sect? If I'm not wrong, this old Taoist is the successor of the incense sect. No wonder he's been acting in a low-key manner and is unknown. Ziyue's eyes revealed a trace of silence. The incense sect was an immortal cultivation method that had a foothold in the imperial court. It was established through the use of incense to become a god. It was also prosperous for a time, but since decades ago, it was suppressed by the imperial court's imperial preceptor and gradually declined. The previous generation's Lugang Temple attendant was said to be the successor of the incense sect. But strangely, before the snake demon's chaos, he mysteriously disappeared. At that time, the imperial court took the opportunity to put the crime of causing the demon's outbreak on his head. Chapter 85. 3 days later, in a dense forest, silently followed behind the old scholar. May I know what Senior Zhou wants this junior to do? At this moment, they were at the foot of the mountain, about 70 miles away from Town. The forest was so dense that it was difficult for ordinary people to enter. Even if they were skilled, they would not be able to move quickly. They had to be careful to guard against the poisonous creatures in the bushes. In these 3 days, Ziyue had been considering whether or not he should accept the old scholar's invitation. But after thinking for a long time, he still decided to come. The reward for the Spirit Eye technique was one reason, but the most important reason was that Right Guardian Zhao Jing had caused too much of a ruckus. On the second day of Zhao Gongyi's disappearance, Zhao Jing seemed to have sensed it and immediately sent his subordinates to investigate. Then, the law enforcement team intervened. Even if they did not find anything, Ziyue was still worried. The law enforcement team was a group of shrewd and capable people. Their methods of investigation were not inferior to the constables of the government. At this moment, he was naturally worried that something might have happened to the old scholar. You know that my surname is Zhou. It seems that you have indeed investigated me these past few days. The old scholar was not surprised at all. Senior Zhou, you must be joking. My strength is low, and I have to be cautious when dealing with an expert like you. It just so happens that my master thinks highly of me. Although I was in a hurry this time and did not have the chance to resign in person, I had someone write a letter. Master will soon know that I came out with Senior Zhou. This way, he will not worry about me. Ziyue said with a fake smile. You are indeed brave and smart. You even know to use your master to pressure me. But if I really wanted to harm you, would I have waited until now? The old scholar's mouth twitched, and he said with some astonishment. He really did not expect Ziyue to be so meticulous. He did not seem like an ordinary youth. I naturally believe in Senior Zhou. Otherwise, I would not have dared to come with you so rashly. But you have to tell me what it is about this time, so that I could be prepared. Ziyue said that he believed him, but in his heart he didn't. Although the Tao of incense stick wasn't considered an evil Tao, it wasn't the orthodox Tao of immortals either. Therefore, he was very wary of this old elementary scholar. Do you know about demons? The old elementary scholar suddenly said. Ziyue's footsteps paused, and he asked in bewilderment, killing demons? In almost an instant, Ziyue turned around and left, saying, I know my own weight. I really don't dare to kill demons. Please forgive me, Senior Zhou. He had long known that this world was a world where demons and ghosts roamed freely. Among them, there were wild beasts that could evolve into mutated beasts if they consumed spiritual items. Mutated beasts usually had boundless strength and improved physique, surpassing wild beasts. Even martial artists at the peak of internal refinement realm weren't a match for powerful mutated beasts. For example, 3 years ago, a golden-armored mutated beast was found in the mine. Even with the strength of the peak of internal refinement, Qinyu, the mining supervisor, he couldn't take it down. He had to ask Ziyue's master, Lu Dong, to kill it. Above the strange beasts were the demons. In other words, even the weakest demons had the strength to contend with a martial artist at the internal chi stage. In the face of demons, no matter how confident Ziyue was, he didn't dare to approach them. That would be no different from courting death. It's not a demon. The old elementary scholar hurriedly stopped Ziyue and said impatiently, Listen to me. Even if I'm an old elementary scholar, facing a demon is a dead end. It's really not a demon? Ziyue carefully observed the old elementary scholar's expression. Of course not. Do you think I'm tired of living to provoke a demon? Every time I walk near Lugang Temple, I take a detour. Why would I provoke a demon? What I'm talking about is a type of existence that isn't a demon, a spirit. The old elementary scholar hurriedly explained. Spirit? Ziyue asked doubtfully. Immediately after, his attention was drawn to the old elementary scholar's previous words. Take a detour near Lugang Temple. Could there be a demon there? It's difficult for ordinary people to distinguish between demons and spirits. It's actually very simple. When animals cultivate and nourish themselves, they give birth to spirituality and become demons. When dead things like plants and stones give birth to spirituality, they become spirits. If we break it down further, plants that have spirituality are called spirits. When dead things like stones have spirituality, they become spirits. However, we generally refer to them as spirits. In order to be able to walk the world, most spirits will devour the living creatures around them in the hope of giving birth to a soul. This way, although their bodies are restricted and cannot leave their original location, their souls can transform into various forms. Even powerful existences can transform into a human form and walk the world. Their bodies are usually filled with spirituality, and they can often be used as treasures to refine magic tools. This time, what we're dealing with is a spirit that has given birth to spirituality from a locust tree. Lao Xiu knew that if he didn't explain clearly, Ziyue would definitely leave, so he explained in detail. How strong is this locust tree spirit? Although Ziyue understood the difference between demons and spirits, What he was most concerned about was the other party's strength. If it was like a demon, it would be at least equivalent to the realm of inner chi and would naturally not be willing to take the risk. Compared to demons, spirits are generally weaker. This locust tree spirit has only given birth to spirituality not long ago, so its strength is even weaker than the weakest demon. Besides, I'll be the one dealing with it this time. You only need to be responsible for restraining it. Lao Xiao said disapprovingly. Then how strong is Senior Zhou? Ziyue asked doubtfully. Lao Xiao's face darkened, and he said in a muffled voice, although I've only cultivated to the 5th level of Qi refinement, it's enough to deal with that locust tree spirit. It seems like he's not much stronger than me, Ziyue muttered to himself. However, he also knew that people who cultivated the way of immortality often had strange means. Even if they were of a lower realm, they could still exert powerful combat strength. After all, Lao Xiao was different from him. He might have mastered Dharma spells and magic weapons that could unleash powerful combat strength, and was confident that he could kill the locust tree spirit. Therefore, even though he was still somewhat doubtful, he still nodded and agreed with Lao Xiao's words for the time being. Therefore, the two of them moved forward again and headed into the depths of the forest. The deeper they went, the denser the forest became. This place was already deserted, and there wasn't even a decent mountain path. There were only some beast paths that some wild beasts used. The paths were twisted and very difficult to traverse. Suddenly, a green figure shot out from a patch of grass like a sharp arrow and pounced directly at Ziyue. Whoosh! With a flash of the knife, a green snake as thick as an arm was cut into 3 or 4 pieces and fell to the ground. Chapter 86. Spiritual Energy +9. Ziyue calmly sheathed his long saber and continued forward. Walking in this hidden mountain forest, it was very common to encounter these kinds of poisonous snakes. Previously, there were 5 or 6 poisonous snakes that had died in his hands, and he had also encountered a blind lone wolf. Naturally, they had become dead creatures at this time. All right, we're almost there. The old scholar finally opened his mouth and spoke when they arrived at a crater formed by 2 tall mountains. The locust tree spirit is in this depression. Ziyue curiously looked at the large depression. Compared to the densely packed trees on the mountain, the trees in this depression were somewhat sparse. But without exception, the trees here were exceptionally tall. This is one of the rare places where spiritual energy gathers, so the plants that grow here are exceptionally tall and lush. Moreover, the chances of strange beasts appearing here are much higher than in the outside world. As the old scholar spoke, he suddenly heard a loud tiger's roar from the depression. The domineering aura of the roar was enough to make one's heart tremble. Ziyue tightened his grip on his long saber and became even more cautious. He didn't know when, but his other hand had taken out a few talismans. Don't worry, it's at most a tiger that has just stepped onto the path of evolution. It's not much of a threat. Although the old scholar said this, he also took out a small golden knife from his bosom. Wisps of spiritual aura were emitted from the small knife, causing one's heart to palpitate. A magic weapon. Ziyue glanced at it, a trace of envy appearing on his face. He also had 2 magic weapons on him, both of which he had obtained from Wu Hao, who had died at his hands. But of these 2 magic weapons, one was a corpse summoning bell for controlling zombies, and the other was a ghost raising gourd for raising ghosts. For someone like him who didn't have ghosts or zombies, they were of no use. But it was obvious that the small golden saber in the old scholar's hand was a magic weapon with extraordinary offensive power. The only thing he didn't know was what level the magic weapon was. Because of the limitations of the material, this golden saber is only of the lower level. It's a 15 restriction magic weapon. As if seeing the envy and doubt in Ziyue's eyes, the old scholar casually explained. 15 seals. Ziyue was alarmed. The strongest corpse summoning bell he had was only a 6 restriction Dharma treasure. However, the zombies controlled by the corpse summoning bell had extraordinary combat strength. One could imagine how powerful the golden thread saber was. Just as he was about to continue asking, he suddenly saw the trees in the distance move. Immediately after, a big white tiger that was half the height of man and far more robust than an ordinary person pounced from the distance. Obviously, this big white tiger had already discovered Ziyue and the young man from afar. It actually treated the two of them as prey and wanted to pounce on them. I was just about to show you the power of my magic tool. The old scholar chuckled, and the spiritual energy in his body surged. In the blink of an eye, the golden blade in his hand trembled and emitted a golden light. Then, like a sharp arrow, it shot out. Roar! The big white tiger roared loudly, and its roar shook the earth. Its huge body pounced forward like a rain of blood, giving off an incomparably powerful deterrent force. At least in Ziyue's mind, the strength of this tiger was definitely not inferior to that of an ordinary martial artist at the peak of the outer forging stage. Coupled with its nimble body, an ordinary outer forging martial artist would not necessarily be able to deal with it. However, a golden light flashed, and the big white tiger that had leapt into the air suddenly stiffened and then fell heavily to the ground. Dead. The small golden blade directly pierced through the top of its head and deeply penetrated, crushing its brain. This big white tiger naturally died in an instant and lost all signs of life. Spiritual energy plus 568. After perceiving the increase in spiritual energy, Ziyue immediately judged that this big white tiger's strength was indeed stronger than that of an ordinary martial artist at the peak of the outer forging stage. It was not inferior to Zhang Bo, who had just entered the inner refining stage and had died at his hands. Let's go. It won't be too late to clean it up when we return. Without sparing a glance at the tiger on the ground, the old scholar quickly led Ziyue into the depths of the mountain valley. Along the way, there were no more ignorant strange beasts that came to disturb them. The two of them quickly arrived at a slightly spacious flat ground. An incomparably tall locust tree that needed at least 3 people to wrap their arms around appeared in front of them. The lush locust tree had lush branches, some of which even drooped down to the ground like sharp claws, deeply embedded in the bodies of a few fallen wild boars. The blood of these wild boars had long dried up, and even their flesh had been sucked dry. Where the fur fell, there were deep depressions, as if only some bones were left. Around the locust tree, there were countless animal bones scattered densely. A rotten and festering smell, coupled with the unique inattribute aura of the locust tree, made one feel uncomfortable. It really is a locust tree that has become a spirit. Ziyue's heart trembled, and a trace of nervousness appeared on his face. Relatively speaking, this was the first time he had encountered such a strange creature. In particular, although this spirit wasn't very strong, it was still an existence comparable to a demon. We have to be careful from now on. Although the locust tree spirit is a plant spirit, it doesn't mean that it can't move. Its roots and branches can all be used as weapons. Not to mention, it can also command ghosts and transform itself into a spirit body to attack. As the old scholar spoke, he quickly took out 3 sticks of incense from his backpack. These 3 sticks of incense were golden in color. They seemed to be a foot long, but the actual incense was only 3 inches long. The incense itself was as golden as jade and as condensed as powder. It looked somewhat precious. Spirit gathering incense. A pained expression flashed across his face. The old scholar resolutely took out a match and lit it one by one. In the blink of an eye, a thick smoke appeared from the incense. A wisp of smoke brushed past Ziyue's body. He lightly inhaled and immediately felt refreshed. His somewhat exhausted spirit from the journey had been greatly replenished. In a moment, I will attack its main body. At that time, it will definitely command ghosts to harass me. I must not let any ghosts near me. No matter what, you have to buy me at least 30 breaths of time. The old scholar spoke quickly. Under the surge of spiritual power, the golden saber in his hand trembled slightly. Then, like a golden bolt of lightning, it rapidly charged towards the huge locust tree in the distance. Puff! The golden saber stabbed directly into the locust tree. Unexpectedly, it was unable to completely sink in. At least half of the saber was still exposed. However, When the saber stabbed into the locust tree, it seemed to have injured it. Traces of blood-red liquid flowed out from the wound, just like the blood of a human body. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Then the huge locust tree, which had been standing still, immediately began to shake. Countless branches and leaves trembled, and even the ground began to tremble violently, as if the earth's crust was surging. The locust tree's spirit had awakened. Chapter 87. In the blink of an eye, countless ghosts rushed out from its lush leaves. These ghosts were all in the form of wild beasts. There were giant tigers, wild boars, mountain goats, black wolves, and even giant pythons. Their souls were thick and solid. At this moment, they had all transformed into their most ferocious forms. As the Yin-Chi filled the air, they quickly rushed toward Ziyue and the old scholar. So many. Ziyue let out a strange cry and moved his body. He wanted to retreat, but when he saw the old scholar standing in place with a nervous face and controlling the golden thread saber to attack the body of the locust tree, he quickly calmed down. He was muttering to himself while controlling the golden thread saber to attack the body of the locust tree. At the same time, he was muttering something, and intense mental energy fluctuations appeared around him. It was obvious that he was casting some complicated spell. 30 breaths. Let's go all out. Ziyue gritted his teeth. With a flip of his hand, he immediately took out a large stack of talismans. For this operation, he had also made countless preparations. Talismans were one of the few tricks in his immortal cultivation. Naturally, he would not forget about them. If not for the fact that talismans could not be stored for a long time, at most half a year, he would have more talismans with him. With a surge of energy, he sprinkled them slightly. Whoosh! More than 10 talismans were sprinkled out by him. In an instant, they were activated and turned into rays of gray light. Soul-subduing talisman. Very quickly, streaks of gray light shot towards these ghosts. It was as if a strong sulfuric acid had been poured out, quickly corroding their souls, causing them to let out loud roars as they retreated in fear. However, there were also ghosts that relied on the strength of their souls and were not afraid of the soul-subduing talisman's corrosion. Some of them had even mastered spells and used ghostly wails and wolf howls, ghost hits the wall, intimidation, and other spells that were used on a profound level. In an instant, the surrounding Yin-Chi filled the air, and traces of interference directly affected Ziyue's mind. The scene in front of him seemed to have changed greatly. It was like hell, making him tremble with fear and chilling to the bone. Those who were timid and cowardly might even have a mental breakdown because of this, allowing them to be beaten and killed. However, Ziyue's mental strength was strong, and his mind was tough. He was not affected at all. All the changes were like a brush of light in his eyes. In the blink of an eye, everything returned to its original state. The ferocious appearance of the ghosts could be seen clearly again. Without any hesitation, Ziyue made a grabbing motion with his hand and threw out another handful of talismans. He knew that there were many of these ghosts, and their souls had been nourished by the ghostwood tree spirits Yin-Chi, so they were generally more solid and powerful. It would be difficult to kill them with just 1 or 2 soul-subduing talismans. However, there was no need for him to kill all of them. He only needed to hold on for 30 breaths of time, because as time passed, he could feel more and more that the old scholar was emitting a terrifying aura that was so powerful that it was frightening. The spell he was using now must be very powerful. However, the ghostwood tree spirit was naturally unwilling to let Ziyue have his way. Powerful mental fluctuations spread out from it, and all the ghosts seemed to be stimulated. They charged fiercely at Ziyue. Even though the soul-subduing talisman's powerful corrosive power was on their bodies, they did not hesitate. Soon, Ziyue felt the ground tremble and crack. A huge root that was more than 10 meters long emerged from the ground. Then, like a long whip, it quickly lashed out. Pa! With a loud bang, a deep imprint appeared on the ground. Ziyue only glanced at it and did not pay it any attention. Although the tree root was long, it was still some distance away from him let alone the old scholar who was even farther away. Of course, the tree root's target was not him, but the magical tool Golden Thread Saber that was constantly hacking at the ghostwood tree spirit. The Golden Thread Saber was nimble and natural, stabbing at the ghostwood tree spirit from time to time. Sometimes, the ghostwood tree spirit would use its branches to slap at it, but the Golden Thread Saber only needed to turn and cut it in half. However, the ghostwood tree spirit's body was extremely tough. Even such a sharp Golden Thread Saber could only leave a small hole in its body. Compared to its enormous body, this was nothing. Roar! A giant python ghost charged in front of Ziyue and let out a deafening howl that caused Ziyue's mind to tremble. Then it swung its tail. Inchi surged, and a strong wind blew. It was a frightening sight. With the soul solidified, even the main body could display powerful fighting strength. "You're courting death." Ziyue's expression did not change as he raised his saber. Plop! Saber cleaving art. Even though martial arts did not cause as much damage to ghosts as spells, it did not mean that martial arts could not kill ghosts. Chi and blood diffused, and the force of the attack was equally lethal to ghosts. In an instant, the snake's thick tail was broken into two, and the python's solid soul body also weakened a little. Again, the saber light was like silver as it rapidly slashed out, blade after blade, as if it would never stop. Hiss! 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 Under the powerful force of the attack, the giant python ghost was constantly weakened. After a few slashes, it was extremely weak. Then, Ziyue's chi and blood rushed forward. The smoke like chi and blood was like magma, directly dispersing the giant python ghost. Naturally, the giant python ghost's soul also dissipated. At this moment, the other ghosts had already closed in. Bai Ziyue's expression did not change in the face of this. He took out another stack of talismans from his bosom once again. This stack of talismans was completely different from the soul subduing talismans from before. Not only was the spiritual light on them brighter, but they were also filled with a scorching aura. Spirit Fire Talisman. This was one of the few talismans in the 100 Talisman catalog that could only be drawn by injecting spiritual energy. It was different from the Spirit Fire spell that Ziyue had mastered. The power of this Spirit Fire Talisman might not be as strong, but the area it covered was much larger. Energy surged, and the Spirit Fire Talisman was instantly activated. Boom! More than 10 streaks of orange-red flames spread continuously, rapidly charging towards the surging ghosts. Oh, miserable howls came out from the mouths of these beast spirits. The spread of the spirit fire had caused them too much damage. Roar! Beastly roars filled with fear rang out. They had already been damaged by the soul-subduing talisman's corrosion, and now that they were infected by the flames, they finally felt that their souls were unstable. Some of them even turned into ashes the moment they were enveloped by the flames. Their souls dissipated. In the blink of an eye, the original 20 to 30 beast-like ghosts were reduced to 10 or so. Moreover, most of them had been burned by the spirit fire talisman, and their souls had become much weaker. However, these beast-like ghosts did not seem to have any spiritual intelligence at all. Under the control of the locust tree spirit, they only hesitated for a moment before charging over again. Ziyue snorted coldly. At this moment, there were not many talismans left in his hands. In particular, the soul-subduing talismans and spirit fire talismans used for attacks had all been used up. However, there was not the slightest trace of fear on his face. Chapter 88. At the end of the day, although there were many ghosts, they were not that strong. Furthermore, he had not used all of his tricks yet. Vajra Talisman, Light Body Talisman. He took out the 2 talismans and slapped them on his body to activate them. Instantly, he felt that his body had become much lighter, and his speed had increased greatly. At the same time, a layer of golden light appeared on his body, making his physical body tougher and more solid. Kill! Without any hesitation, Ziyue raised his saber and charged forward, swinging it continuously. As the saber light flashed, The ghosts were cut in half one by one. After 2 or 3 slashes, no matter how solid the soul was, it would be weakened. Then the soul would scatter. Even if the ghost's attacks landed on his body, under the protection of the Vajra talisman and his powerful chi and blood, they did not cause any harm to him. The moment the ghost's in chi came into contact with his spiritual power, it dissipated into nothingness. On the other side, the old scholar's spell had finally reached its most critical moment. Above his head, the spiritual power surged violently, distorting the void. It was as if a terrifying existence was being drawn to him. "Ancestor, please show yourself." With a soft cry, the old scholar's face turned solemn. Immediately after, the terrifying power above his head poured into his body. Buzz, buzz, buzz. The old scholar's aura rose steadily, as if he had eaten an all-nourishing elixir and became violent. Even his slightly stooped body straightened at this moment, giving him a mighty and majestic feeling. The aura on his body had changed greatly, and it was filled with endless majesty. Spirit summoning technique. Ziyue was moved. He had done some research on the path of incense, so he naturally knew that this was a powerful spell secretly passed down from the path of incense. It was said that using this secret spell could summon a powerful ghost or the ancestor of one's own sect, allowing the caster to exert power far beyond his own. Boom, boom, boom. In the distance, the locust tree spirit seemed to have sensed danger. Its roots scurried and slammed on the ground, making a loud rumbling sound. Just as Yue sensed that the ghostwood spirit's roots were too far away from them, and that he had killed all of the ghosts, he was at his wit's end. The ghostwood tree spirit's body surged wildly. In an instant, countless leaves fell from its body. Then, like a rain of arrows, they rushed toward them. Divine light shield. Ziyue's expression changed. Without thinking, he immediately used the spirit light shield. Puff, puff, puff. Countless leaves fell on the spirit light shield, making muffled sounds, but they were all blocked. It's just a last-ditch struggle. The old elementary scholar, who had used the invocation of the deity technique, had an indescribable aura. He waved his hand, and the golden threaded knife, which had been thrown away at some point, was summoned back to him. However, he did not throw out the golden thread saber again. Instead, he pointed his finger slightly. Suddenly, a huge ripple appeared in the void and spread out layer by layer. Those leaves, which rushed into the ripple, were annihilated like grass and turned into dust. At the same time, a layer of pitch-black clouds appeared in the sky. Wisps of lightning flashed through the clouds, oppressive and terrifying. Thunder technique. This was thunder technique. Not only was Ziyue shocked, but the ghostwood tree spirit also seemed to feel a kind of shock and fear when it sensed the terrifying and oppressive aura in the dark clouds. Its roots, branches, and leaves trembled rapidly, twisting together to form an umbrella shape, as if it was trying to protect itself. "It's useless." The old elementary scholar laughed coldly and pointed his finger. Crack! Lightning exploded in the dark clouds, and a bolt of lightning as thick as an arm struck down. Boom! The huge ghostwood tree spirit trembled violently and was then submerged by the lightning. Countless branches and leaves were destroyed and charred black. All the vitality of the ghostwood tree spirit seemed to have been greatly damaged at this moment. The originally flourishing branches and leaves quickly withered and turned yellow. Boom! Then a second bolt of lightning struck. Then a third, a fourth, one after another. The lightning struck the ghostwood tree spirit, quickly chopping off its trunk and branches. Even the 2 roots that were still able to move were charred black and broken. So powerful! Ziyue was dumbfounded. The graceful manner in which the old scholar was using the thunder and lightning spell really shocked him. That kind of calmness and the power contained in the lightning were really frightening. But soon, Ziyue realized that the old elementary scholar's complexion was not right. As the thunderbolts continued to strike, his aura was rapidly weakening. In the end, his complexion even seemed a little gray, and his spirit was also becoming sluggish. Boom! When the 9th bolt of lightning struck, the old elementary scholar finally seemed to be unable to hold on and disperse the technique. The clouds in the sky dispersed, and the sky regained its clarity. At this moment, the huge ghostwood tree spirit, which was originally incomparably tall and lush, had all its branches and leaves broken. All that was left of the huge tree was a charred stump that stood there, dead and still. "Is the ghostwood tree spirit dead?" Ziyue asked, and subconsciously glanced at the attribute panel. Spiritual energy, 10542. This was definitely an extremely high number. Even Ziyue himself did not expect that his spiritual energy would increase so much in this operation. But when he thought about how the 20 to 30 beast-shaped ghosts had all been killed by him, he felt that it was normal. But at this moment, his spiritual energy did not increase. No, the ghostwood tree spirit is not dead yet. His heart skipped a beat. How could such a terrifying lightning attack fail to kill the ghostwood tree spirit? Not good, let's go. The old elementary scholar exhaled softly and stared with wide eyes at the seemingly withered stump. Then, his expression changed drastically, and he hurriedly turned to flee. Although the invocation of the spirit was powerful and could allow him to unleash power far beyond his own, the aftereffects were also extremely obvious. At this moment, although his appearance did not change much, he had become extremely weak. It would be good if he could unleash 20 to 30% of his strength. Most importantly, the spiritual energy in his body had been exhausted. It was difficult for him to even use spells. As soon as he finished speaking, a terrifying existence that looked like a beast charged out from the charred stump. It had branches on its head and a body that looked like a terrifying beast. The ghostwood tree spirit's condensed spiritual body finally could not hold back after dodging the lightning attack and charged out. Roar! As soon as it appeared, the ghostwood tree spirit's spiritual body let out a strange roar. "Umph!" By Ziyue groaned. This strange sound actually contained a terrifying shockwave. Even though he was far away, it still caused him to feel dizzy. At this moment, the old elementary scholar was in an even worse state. He had only taken 2 or 3 steps when this ghostly howl smashed into his head like a heavy hammer, and he fell to the ground. "It's over." A trace of despair flashed across the old elementary scholar's eyes. He didn't expect that he wouldn't be able to kill his opponent even after using the invocation of the god's technique and borrowing the explosive power of his lightning technique. Chapter 89. So fast, Ziyue's heart sank. The instant the locust tree spirit appeared, his first thought was naturally to escape. However, even though the locust tree spirit looked weak, its speed was extremely fast. When it shot over, it was like a black bolt of lightning. Most importantly, the locust tree spirit's first target was not the old scholar who had fallen to the point where he could no longer fight back, but Zhou Donghuang, who still had his breath intact. "I'll go all out." Ziyue knew that with his speed, it would not take long for the tree spirit to catch up to him if he tried to escape. He could only give it his all. However, with his current strength, it was truly slightly insufficient to deal with this extremely formidable ghostwood tree soul. The spiritual flame technique. Only by raising the spiritual flame technique to perfection can I pose a threat to it. Bai Ziyue knew that compared to the means of martial artists, the power of spells was much stronger. Most importantly, the spiritual flame technique had a certain restraining effect on ghosts and other spirits. The spiritual flame technique at the Great Mastery stage was already extremely powerful and could be considered his strongest attack. If he raised it to perfection, he would probably be able to cause damage to the locust tree spirit. At this thought, Ziyue looked at the amount of spirit power he had left and gritted his teeth without hesitation. Consume 3,200 points of spirit power to raise the spiritual flame technique to perfection. Raise. In an instant, all the information regarding the spiritual flame technique and spell structure optimization flowed into his mind. It was as if he had practiced this spell thousands of times and was extremely familiar with it. He could activate it in the blink of an eye. Furthermore, He could clearly sense that the power of this spell was at least twice as strong as when it was at the Great Mastery stage. One must know that the spiritual flame technique at the Great Mastery stage could melt steel and turn iron into water. The spiritual flame technique at perfection would definitely be even more terrifying. Consume 3,200 points of spirit power to raise the spiritual flame shield to perfection. Raise. Seeing that he still had enough spirit energy left, Ziyue felt a strong sense of danger and hurriedly raised the level of this defensive spell to perfection. Ziyue immediately felt that his understanding of the spirit light shield had increased by a huge level. Even the spell structure and runic composition had been greatly optimized. Howl! At the same time, the ghostwood tree spirit body finally arrived in front of Ziyue and let out a shrill howl. Then, its body suddenly stretched out like a ferocious beast, revealing its long claws and teeth. These claws and teeth were pitch black, but they were extremely condensed, as if they were real. As they streaked across the air, ripples spread out. Under the dense in-shi, the vegetation on the ground quickly withered. With a flash of black light, the ghostwood tree spirit's claws slashed viciously at Ziyue. Spell Divine Light Shield. Intense yuan qi surged in front of Ziyue. In an instant, a transparent light shield appeared in front of him. At the crucial moment, Ziyue directly used Spirit Light Shield. Buzz, buzz, buzz. Ear-piercing and sharp sounds quickly came from the ghostwood tree spirit's claws and Ziyue's Divine Light Shield. On the ghostwood claws, a cold light was wanton, but the defensive power of the Divine Light Shield was equally terrifying. In particular, the Divine Light Shield, which had been upgraded to perfection, only shook slightly when the ghostwood claws slashed across, but did not shatter in the slightest. Spirit Fire Technique. Ziyue, who was originally somewhat nervous, was delighted, and the spiritual energy in his body quickly rushed out. In the blink of an eye, an orange-yellow flame appeared in his hand. Spell Spirit Fire Technique. This orange-yellow flame was the size of a fist, but it seemed to contain a terrifying power that caused the air around Ziyue to distort. Go! Ziyue waved his hand slightly, and the flame quickly rushed out. It looked like it was drifting, but its speed was also extremely fast. It was like a sharp wind whistling. Boom! The flame rushed directly to the ghostwood tree spirit body and exploded in an instant. Howl! A miserable howl sounded out. The violent flame was watered by the in-shi, and like boiling oil, it became even more violent, wreaking havoc and destroying the spirit body. When the spirit chi within the flames was exhausted, the spirit body of the locust tree, which had been close to solid, was now countless times weaker than before. Again, without any hesitation, Ziyue stretched out his hand, and another spirit fire technique was released. After the first one, there was another. The spiritual energy in Ziyue's body seemed to have no end. Boom, boom, boom. Countless flames whistled, and in an instant, the ghostwood tree spirit's spirit body was submerged. So strong? The old scholar, who had already lost all hope, was stunned. He almost did not dare to believe his eyes. Since when could the power of a spirit fire technique reach such a terrifying level? If he remembered correctly, Ziyue was only at the 3rd level of Chi Disciple. It's finally dead. Sensing that his spiritual energy had suddenly increased by a large amount, Ziyue finally stopped using the spirit fire technique and heaved a sigh of relief. But soon, Ziyue looked at the huge charred ghostwood tree in the distance and asked hesitantly, Senior Zhou, is the ghostwood tree spirit really dead now? Of course it's dead. The spirit body is the root of the ghostwood tree spirit, and the ghostwood tree is its main body. Just like us humans, without the spirit, the physical body is just a pile of dead things. The old scholar struggled to get up. Although he explained, he still had a lot of doubts in his heart. After thinking for a while, he asked hesitantly, Your technique, spirit fire technique. Ziyue said straightforwardly, I know it's the spirit fire technique, but I don't remember the spirit fire technique of the Chaoyang sect being this strong, right? The old scholar asked in astonishment. Chaoyang sect. Bai Ziyue had some doubts in his heart. Then, he suddenly became alert. He thought of the purple Qi divine observation technique that he had obtained. It was very likely that it was the Chaoyang sect's immortal cultivation technique. Immediately, he said calmly, I don't know. Maybe it's because of some modifications. But your master is also very magnanimous. After passing down the immortal cultivation technique, he actually let you wander outside and even joined a Jianghu sect. It's really, but the Chaoyang sect has a tradition of passing down their techniques everywhere. The real immortal cultivation technique is only passed down within their own sect. For people like you who have cultivated their immortal cultivation technique, although you have the title of a disciple of the Chaoyang sect, you are actually no different from a rogue cultivator. As the old scholar spoke, a look of realization gradually appeared on his face. In his opinion, Ziyue's talent was outstanding for being able to cultivate to the third level of Qi cultivation at such a young age. But for a large sect like the Chaoyang sect, perhaps this was not the case. It was also very normal for them to let Ziyue grow freely. Then I wonder what realm I have to cultivate to before I can join the Chaoyang sect and obtain the immortal cultivation technique? Ziyue suppressed the excitement in his heart and asked. This was the first time he had heard about the immortal cultivation technique, so he naturally wanted to find out more. After all, his purple Qi divine observation technique had stopped at the 5th level, which really made him feel helpless. Chapter 90. The Chaoyang sect can be considered one of the biggest sects in the immortal realm. They're all about fate, and there are no restrictions on cultivation. However, only those who have reached the 7th level of the Qi refining stage can pass through the remote cloud swamp and enter the Chaoyang sect. The remote cloud swamp is quite a distance away from here, so I advise you not to think about it for the time being. The old scholar shook his head as he spoke. Not to mention the dangers involved in the Jianghu, the remote cloud swamp alone is not a place ordinary people can enter. Ziyue was able to reach the 3rd level of the Qi refining stage, which is not bad. However, the path of immortal realm becomes more and more difficult as one progresses. After 20 years of hard work, he was only able to reach the 5th level of the Qi refining stage. However, even if Ziyue was more talented than him, he would not be able to reach the 7th level of the Qi refining stage in such a short time. Of course, I am aware of this, Ziyue said calmly, but he could not hide the disappointment in his heart. The long journey was nothing to him. He had always wanted to see the mountains and rivers of this world and experience the wonders of the world. But at least the 7th level of the Qi refining stage made him feel helpless. After all, his purple Qi divine observation technique was only able to reach the 5th level. However, with this information, he finally had a goal. No matter how difficult it was, he was confident that he would find a way to obtain it. All right. Now it's time to reap the rewards. Feeling that his spiritual energy had recovered a little, the old scholar let out a sigh of relief. Ziyue's strength was beyond his expectations. I wonder what kind of treasure this tree has. Ziyue naturally felt that the old scholar was slowly recovering his spiritual energy. However, he did not have the intention to kill and steal the treasure, so he did not mind. Instead, he looked at the charred tree. Normally, when this kind of plant becomes a spirit, its body must have a spiritual nature. However, although this tree is large and tough, for us immortal realm cultivators, the most important thing is its heart. As the old scholar spoke, the golden blade appeared in his hand once again. With a powerful slash, he sliced the tree. Having lost the support of the ghostwood tree spirit, the ghostwood tree was now much tougher than ordinary trees, but it was still unable to withstand the sharpness of the old scholar's magic weapon. In the blink of an eye, the charred outer layer of the locust tree was peeled off. Soon, the old scholar dug out a dark red object that was as thick as an arm and about a foot long. This was the locust tree spirit's wood heart. However, it was different from what Ziyue had imagined. Although the locust tree spirit's wood heart contained a strong spirituality, it was more of a cold aura. Just by approaching it, he could feel a wave of cold yin qi continuously invading his body. If an ordinary person came into contact with it for a long time, even if they did not die, they would definitely fall seriously ill. Different plant spirits will naturally form different wood cores. This ghostwood tree spirit is an yin-type entity, so the wood core it forms is a superior material for refining yin-type artifacts. As he spoke, the old scholar paused for a moment before continuing. According to our agreement, I only needed to give you the spirit eye technique. However, at the last moment, you did put in a lot of effort, and you were the one who killed the ghostwood tree spirit. However, this locust tree spirit's wood heart is also something I must have on this trip, so I cannot give it up. Therefore, in addition to the spirit eye technique, I will give you some compensation. How about it? At the end of the day, the old scholar still had some misgivings. Considering that Ziyue's strength had far exceeded his expectations, and that he had used the spirit invocation technique, the aftereffects were obvious. Even if he recovered some of his spiritual energy, he would not be able to fight very well. Naturally, he did not dare to split the spoils according to the previous plan. Although the two of them had been acquaintances for a few years, there was not much trust between them. What kind of compensation? Ziyue naturally knew that the locust tree spirit's wood heart was a rare item. However, even if he knew its use, it would be useless without the method to refine artifacts. He might as well take some tangible benefits that might be more beneficial to him. How about this golden threaded saber in my hand? You have seen the power of a 15-level forbidden artifact. Once it is activated, ordinary internal trained martial artists would not be able to withstand it. However, I can't give it to you now. I will have to wait until we return to Qinghe Town. The old scholar pondered for a moment and said with some reluctance, plus that thunder technique. Ziyue suddenly said. Actually, he was also quite interested in the spirit invocation technique. However, he knew that it was a secret technique of the incense path. Presumably, the old scholar would not pass it on, so he did not mention it. It is possible, but I do not have a jade slip specifically inscribed with this technique, so I will have to wait a few days before I can give it to you. In addition, although this thunder technique is powerful, the amount of spiritual energy it consumes is too terrifying. Even I would only dare to try it when my strength has increased dramatically with the spirit invocation technique. With your strength, you will not be able to use it in a short period of time. The old scholar only thought for a moment before agreeing. In the end, he gave a special reminder. Of course I know. Ziyue nodded. Although the power of the old scholar's thunder technique was terrifying, he had also seen the miserable state the old scholar was in after using it. In a situation where he did not have enough strength, he naturally would not take the risk. Then, the two did not stay there any longer and quickly began to return the way they came. In a short while, they arrived at the side of the dead tiger. Perhaps it was because of the fierce aura. Although there was a wild wolf wandering around, it did not dare to approach. This prey is worth the most if it is intact. However, that would cause too much of a commotion. Let's divide it up and take out the tiger skin and bones that are worth the most. Perhaps we can exchange them for hundreds of taels of silver. The old scholar looked at the white tiger and said in a low voice. He did not mention giving it up. Although he was a cultivator of the way of immortality, he also needed silver to buy many things for cultivation. He was not someone who did not eat the 5 grains. Ziyue nodded. In comparison, he did not want to be in the limelight. The tiger had already begun to evolve, and its strength was not inferior to that of an internal practitioner. Based on his external strength, he was no match for it. Moreover, the right guardian, Zhao Jing, was investigating the disappearance of Zhao Gongyi. With the power of the faction, he should be able to find out very quickly. This time, apart from Zhao Gongyi, Zhang Bo, who had just entered internal refinement, was also missing. Once the news of him killing the strange tiger spread, he would be easily targeted. After following Master Li in butchering for 3 years, Ziyue's method of handling the prey was naturally exquisite. A long saber lightly flicked along the tiger's head and then directly pulled out the tendons and skin. It did not cause much damage, and a relatively complete tiger skin was peeled off. Then came the bones and the penis. Soon, the cloth bags on their bodies were completely filled. Chapter 91. By the way, Senior Zhou, may I know what the incense you lit earlier was? Ziyue asked curiously along the way. Previously, when the old scholar lit the incense, Zhou Dongwang only had to take a light sniff to feel energized and recover much of his energy. It was definitely a good item. That's spirit-gathering incense, a magical incense that can quickly restore mental strength. A single strand was enough to allow a cultivator at the 4th or 5th level of qi refinement to recover to their original state when their mental strength was depleted. If you want, you can buy it from me. Other than the spirit-gathering incense, I also have spirit-gathering incense, soul-calming incense, and soul-guiding incense. They have different uses, but they are all good items that are hard to come by. The old elementary scholar smiled faintly and said calmly, "How much will it cost?" Ziyue pondered for a moment. The effects of the spirit-gathering incense were indeed miraculous and tempted him. One had to know that whether it was drawing talismans or casting spells, they all consumed mental strength. Once his mental strength was depleted, he would need time to recover. If he had the help of the spirit-gathering incense, it would save him a lot of time. Perhaps at a critical moment, the spirit-gathering incense could also be of use. The spirit-gathering incense is 50 taels each. Spirit-gathering incense, soul-calming incense, and soul-guiding incense are all 30 taels each. The old scholar said with a look of unscrupulousness. That's a little expensive. Ziyue frowned. He admitted that these magical incense were good items, but to him, they were not essential items. Spending a large amount of money to buy them all at once made him hesitate. Actually, I'm quite interested in some of the talismans you have. If it's possible, we can exchange them. The old scholar said with a look of interest. During the previous battle, Ziyue's endless stream of talismans had made him gasp in amazement. Otherwise, just a large number of ghosts would be enough to give him a headache. Of course, Ziyue hurriedly agreed. By the way, Senior Zhou, I heard that the 5th channel head has a junior brother. Do you know him? Suddenly, Ziyue asked in a seemingly casual manner. Then he fixed his gaze on the old scholar. Long ago, he had learned from Wu Hao's cultivation notes that the 5th channel head had a junior brother. Not long ago, he happened to eavesdrop on the conversation between the 5th channel head's disciple, Zhang Yuchang, and the water bandit, Shui Zhongxian, which confirmed this point once again. Furthermore, through their conversation, he determined that the martial uncle that Zhang Yuchang mentioned was very likely to be near Qinghe town and was even plotting something. However, when he searched through his memories, he couldn't find anyone who met the requirements to cultivate the way of immortality. The sudden appearance of this old elementary scholar made him suspicious. Junior brother of Channel 5? I don't know. I've only met the 5th Dao master once from afar. He's always considered himself a rogue cultivator, so I've never heard of him having any sect or inheritance. The old elementary scholar calmly shook his head and said, seeing that his expression didn't seem to be fake, and that Ziyue was certain that this old elementary scholar was a disciple of the burning incense path and didn't seem to have any connections with the 5th channel head. He nodded his head in agreement. However, I must remind you that the 5th channel head isn't as pure and kind as the outside world says. If you meet him, you'd better be careful. The old elementary scholar gave a reminder instead. I shouldn't have any interactions with him. However, if I really meet him, I'll naturally be careful. Ziyue shook his head and said calmly. Then, he seemed to have thought of something and asked curiously, I heard you say that there's a demon near the Willow Gang Temple on South Street. Did I say that? The old elementary scholar's eyes flickered as he said, You did. The more Ziyue confirmed this, the more scared he became. Although there were few people near the Willow Gang Temple, it was still very close to the South Street. If there really was a demon, it would be a very unsettling matter. If you say there is, then there is. The old elementary scholar didn't seem to want to talk about this matter and gave a perfunctory look. Is it a snake demon? Is it the snake demon from before? Ziyue didn't want to let it go so easily and continued to probe. The old elementary scholar still didn't answer, so Ziyue had to change the topic and began to ask him about immortal cultivation. It could be said that he had a better understanding of the world of immortal cultivators. After returning to his residence, Ziyue placed the long saber on the table and took out a jade scroll and a small golden saber. Spiritual eye technique and golden saber. Ziyue looked at the two items and couldn't help but feel a trace of joy in his eyes. The spiritual eye technique was, needless to say, it was a technique. According to the old elementary scholar, once the spiritual eye technique was mastered, not only could it see through illusions and destroy evil techniques, it could also see the strength of others. It could see how strong a martial artist's chi and blood was and whether or not he had cultivated inner force in his body. It could even determine the level of immortal cultivators. It was definitely a convenient technique that was hard to come by. At the very least, it could allow him to predict the enemy's movements before he faced them. As for the golden saber, although it looked beautiful, it was incomparably sharp. Most importantly, this would be the first dermic artifact that Ziyue could use freely. Other than these two, there should be another thunder technique, the thunderfall technique. Thinking of the destructive power of the thunder technique, Ziyue secretly looked forward to it. After thinking for a while, Ziyue picked up the spiritual eye technique jade scroll and infused it with his mental strength. In an instant, the method of using the spiritual eye technique appeared in his mind. The complexity of the spiritual eye technique is far greater than the grudge cleansing technique. The difficulty of using it is also greatly increased. Ziyue sighed in his heart and looked at his attribute panel. Name, Ziyue strength, 17, cannot be increased. Speed, 15, cannot be increased. Physique, 18, cannot be increased. Mental strength, 8, cannot be increased. Spiritual power, 1238, can be increased. Martial arts, indestructible Vajra technique, perfect. Iron mantle technique, can be fused. Martial techniques, 18 consecutive strikes, perfection. Single character linked fist, perfection. Chopping blade art, perfection, can be upgraded. Cloud traversing steps can be upgraded. Lancet blade technique can be upgraded. Heaven binding hands, unmastered. Immortal techniques. Purple chi visualization technique level 3 talisman technique. Perfect magic. Perfect spiritual flame technique. Perfect divine light shield. Grudge cleansing technique can be increased. Spiritual eye technique cannot be increased. Spiritual power, 6598 inch as expected. The amount of my spiritual power has increased by a lot. And this is because I used up a total of 6,400 points of spiritual power to upgrade the spiritual flame technique and divine light shield to perfect. Ziyue's eyes flashed with a hint of excitement. To him, the biggest gain was not the techniques and magical items, but the spiritual power points. This was because this was the foundation for his rapid increase in strength and his ability to stand firm in this dangerous world. Since my spiritual power is still sufficient, I can increase my strength again. Ziyue looked at his various martial arts and spells and muttered to himself. Recommended a new book, Mineral C. Li Hichuan liked to promote the Mineral C app, develop mining equipment, build heavy-duty railways, build a chemical base, establish an intelligent factory. Starting from a small coal mine that was about to close, he went on a journey and built a mining empire. Chapter 92. On May 1st, a few minutes past midnight, it will be officially published. Although it was not the first time, I was still a little excited, nervous. This book has really taken a lot of my effort. Everyone must think that I've saved up a lot of manuscripts, or that I'm living an easy life. No, actually, that is not the case. I can seriously say that Firework worked very hard and didn't slack off at all. I have rejected all invitations from friends and dates. Girlfriend? Why would I need a girlfriend to write a book? Being single makes me happy. Every day, I even wrote word by word. After more than 40 days of publishing, my back is stiff. Sitting on the chair, my whole body is tense and uncomfortable. Every day, I can't keep my eyes open, so I climb into bed and go to sleep. The next day, I wake up early and continue to use the computer. Finally, my efforts were not in vain. I have achieved some results. I can see people giving me tips almost every day. For more than 10 days, the number of recommendation tickets has reached more than 2,000. There were 2 days when it reached 3,000, although it dropped immediately, crying face. Now, the number of bookmarks has reached 52,000, which should be a satisfactory number. I would like to thank my editor Chinghu for recommending me all the way. Only then can I relax and continue writing. I would also like to thank everyone for supporting me all the way and giving me confidence. However, at the end of the day, this book is going to be published. What is the most important thing after it is published? Subscription. 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 The data of the public period only represents the past. Only the subscription will determine Firework's future. I really hope that everyone can continue to support Firework. Also, after it is published, it will definitely be a hit. On the first day, it will be published 7 times in a row. It will be 21,000 words, which should not be a small number. After that, it will be 3,000 to 9,000 words a day. As for tips, it will usually be a hit. If there is a guild master, it will be a hit even if it means risking my life. This is also a small obsession of mine. I have been writing books for many years, but I have never received a tip from a guild master. I hope this book can solve this obsession. Coincidentally, Chijian has an event where rewards are returned. This is the time where rewards are the most profitable. I'll try my best to update it with 80,000 words, and I think I can return 12% of the rewards. In the end, he sincerely asked for everyone's subscription support. Fireworks relied on this to make a living. He wouldn't deliberately act pitiful or anything, but he really needed to rely on the royalties to make a living. In the end, it was still better to ask for a wave of monthly votes. Even though I knew that there would be a lot of big shots on the 1st of May, and little Fireworks could only look up from a corner. But even a salted fish has dreams, right? Fireworks still hoped that he could make it into the top 10 of the new book list. Even if he failed, at least he tried. What if he succeeded? The editor said that my luck with this book is pretty good. I want to rely on you guys to help me increase my luck. I'll write the book. I'll leave the rest to you guys. Many thanks. Chapter 93. In terms of external forging techniques, only the iron shirt hasn't been integrated. With its cultivation characteristics of strengthening the body, it can definitely optimize the invincible Vajra divine art to be even more powerful. Other than that, in terms of spells, I only have the beginner level of the resentment cleansing spell, which can be improved. But this spell is just a simple auxiliary spell, so there's no rush. In this case, there aren't many things that can be improved. Only the chopping blade technique and cloud walking steps haven't been improved to perfection. As for the willow blade technique, it won't increase my strength much, so I'll skip it for now. Ziyue considered and quickly made a decision. Spend 2,000 spirit points to integrate the iron shirt and the invincible Vajra divine art. Integrate. Spend 2,000 spirit points to upgrade the chopping blade technique to perfection. Upgrade. Spend 2,000 spirit points to upgrade the cloud walking steps to perfection. Upgrade. In an instant, all kinds of realizations appeared in his mind. The new invincible Vajra divine art not only improved his physical defense and physical strength, but also gave him a deeper understanding of strength. He just stood there, and under the turbulence of strength, every corner of his body that came in contact with the air emitted a high-frequency vibration sound. There's almost no part of my body that can't release strength. This is a true state of perfection. Ziyue's eyes revealed a trace of joy. Originally, although his strength was equally strong, he couldn't release strength so smoothly. There were always a few places on the body where strength couldn't be transmitted. These places were actually equivalent to the weak points of a martial artist's cultivation, and were weaker in comparison to other places. But as the iron shirt was integrated into the invincible Vajra divine art, it immediately made up for the original shortcoming. It was truly flawless, and every corner of his body could release strength. In addition, the chopping blade technique and cloud walking steps have been improved to perfection. Now, the strength of my attacks and the speed of my body have been greatly improved. Perhaps, even if I face some relatively ordinary internal training martial artists, it's not impossible. Ziyue had a kind of realization in his heart. Zhang Bo, who had just entered the internal refinement realm, was no longer his opponent. As for the internal refinement realm experts, he was confident that even if he couldn't defeat them, he wouldn't be at a disadvantage soon. As expected, although I have a lot of soul energy, I can't stop myself from spending it. Ziyue looked at the remaining amount of spirit energy and could not help but sigh. Right Guardian Zhao Jing had his own courtyard. Zhao Jing sat alone at the head of the table. His eyes were indifferent as he looked down at the people below. His expression was unreadable. Guo Zhengyang, your disciple is here. Guo Zhengyang answered with a perturbed expression. You really don't know where your senior brother is? Zhao Jing asked calmly. His heart trembled. Having followed his master for many years, he naturally knew that the calmer his master's voice was, the angrier he was. Guo Zhengyang said in a low voice, Disciple does not know. Naturally, he didn't want to be involved in this matter, because if something went wrong, he would be implicated. His master's anger was hard to bear, but could he bear the sect master's anger? Luha, you tell me. Zhao Jing said softly. Yes. A middle-aged man in the uniform of a law enforcement disciple answered and said, According to our investigation, before Zhao Gongyi went missing, he went to the homes of intersect disciple Wang Jian and Qinghe Wharf supervisor Zhang Bo. According to their family members, Zhao Gongyi gave them a generous gift when he went there. The total amount was about 800 taels of silver. Then, in the morning of the next few days, Wang Jian, Zhang Bo, and the others would immediately get up and leave. They would return in less than 2 hours. It was just that 3 days ago, after they went out, they never came back. All right, we also found out that before Zhao Gongyi went to give gifts, he looked for Junior Brother Guo. It seems that Junior Brother Guo went to Jingxi Bank to withdraw 300 taels of silver. I don't know what it was for. Guo Zhengyang immediately broke out in a cold sweat. You still say that you don't know? Zhao Jing said in an indifferent tone. I only know that after Senior Brother Zhao was defeated by Ziyue, he couldn't accept it. A few days ago, he asked to borrow some silver from me to do something. He didn't tell me what it was. Master, you know me. I've always been a little clever. I know that Senior Brother Zhao has always dreamed of becoming an outstanding disciple, so I had some guesses. However, I didn't dare to get involved. Who knew that not long after, Senior Brother went missing? Guo Zhengyang's body trembled, and he hurriedly explained with a trembling voice. In that case, Zhao Gongyi was killed by Ziyue? Zhao Jing asked softly. I don't know. Guo Zhengyang said softly. Haha, no matter what, my disciple is dead. It won't be so easy to let it go. Go, invite Ziyue here. I like to see what he has to say in front of me. Zhao Jing said with a gloomy face. Yes. The law enforcement disciple, Lu He, responded and walked out. Not long after the law enforcement disciple left, an old man who looked like a housekeeper suddenly walked over and said respectfully, Master, a person who calls himself Li Yinru, the son of Li Zhao, has come to pay his respects. Call him in. After thinking for a while, Zhao Jing's face changed slightly, and he said in a deep voice. Not long after, a young man with a tall and straight figure and starry eyes walked in. Obviously, he was Li Yinru. Junior Li Yinru pays his respects to Protector Zhao. Li Yinru bowed slightly and said with a smile, I didn't expect that after not seeing you for a few years, the young man from back then has become so tall. I wonder how Home Masterly has been recently? Zhao Jing said with a smile, My father is naturally well. Li Yinru replied. Seeing that Zhao Jing didn't continue, he hurriedly said, Actually, Li Yinru has come this time to ask Uncle Zhao for a favor. Zhao Jing naturally knew that Li Yinru wouldn't visit him for no reason. His expression didn't change as he asked, What is it? Even Home Masterly can't do it? I know that every branch's sect leader, protector, and various supervisors have the right to recommend their disciples to compete for the position of outstanding disciple. I'm here this time because I hope that Uncle Zhao can recommend 1 or 2 disciples. Li Yinru said. Hearing this, Guo Jingyang, who was standing at the side, changed his expression and became anxious. Originally, with Zhao Gongyi's disappearance, he could naturally obtain his master's recommendation. As long as he planned carefully, he would have a chance to compete for it. However, if the recommendation fell to someone else, what would he do? Wouldn't all his previous plans be for naught? For the selection of outstanding disciple, there is a limit to the number of people in each place. Furthermore, the requirement is that you must be a disciple of the local branch to be eligible to participate. If I remember correctly, you are not a disciple of the Qinghetown branch. That's right, you can't join at the last minute either. You must be a disciple of the local branch for at least a year. Zhao Jing shook his head and said, Junior has naturally made ample preparations before coming here. As early as a year ago, I had already recorded my identity as a disciple in the Qinghetown branch. Naturally, I will fulfill this condition. Furthermore, other than Protector Zhao, I also found Supervisor Yin Jixing, Supervisor Lu Yanhong, and Supervisor Guoliang. Now, they have all agreed to recommend me. Originally, I didn't want to trouble Uncle Zhao, because I know that Uncle Zhao also has a disciple that you value. However, I heard that the disciple recently had an accident. Of course, as a reward, I know that Uncle Zhao has always wanted to return to the Scorching Sun Gang's Wujiang County headquarters to work. Now that Supervisor Su, who was in charge of shipping, has passed away, this is an opportunity. Can it really be done? Zhao Jing asked with a slightly moved expression. Although he was only a shipping supervisor, how could the supervisor of Wujiang County be the same as the supervisor of Qinghetown? Even if he was the protector of the Qinghetown branch, in reality, whether it was profit or power, he could not be compared to a supervisor of Wujiang County. For example, the leader of the Qinghetown branch, Lu Dong, was actually the same position as Li Yinru's father, Li Zhao, but there was a huge difference in status and power. It shouldn't be a problem. Li Yinru said confidently, Okay, I will be the one to recommend you. Zhao Jing said in a deep voice. Okay, with the recommendation of Protector Zhao and the other 3 supervisors, I'm almost certain that I will succeed. Li Yinru was overjoyed and very excited. He knew that although the elders valued the disciples' talent and strength, if they had the support of the majority of the people in the gang, they would also have a higher chance of being selected. Furthermore, in terms of talent and strength, he was not weak. Otherwise, his father wouldn't have helped him plan and fight for this opportunity a year ago. Below, Guo Jingyang, who had been listening, turned pale. He could not help but lower his head, and a trace of resentment appeared in his eyes. He had planned in many ways and tried his best to provoke the conflict between Zhao Gongyi and Ziyue. Although he was surprised that Zhao Gongyi had killed Ziyue this time, he also thought that at least he would have a chance to fight for the position of the outstanding disciple. However, at this moment, Li Yinru suddenly jumped out of nowhere and directly took away his chance. The son of Wujiang County's Hall, Masterly? Guo Jingyang's face suddenly became very bitter. In the face of absolute strength, all plans were as laughable as castles in the air. Any Dharma artifact had its own spirituality. Therefore, if a person who cultivated the immortal Tao wanted to use a Dharma artifact freely, they had to subdue its spirituality and infuse it with their own aura. Only then could they use it freely and display the power that the Dharma artifact should have. At this moment, Ziyue was holding a small golden knife and releasing his mental strength. It was like flowing water that continuously flowed into the small knife. Buzz, buzz, buzz. The small knife trembled slightly, as if it was unwilling to be subdued so easily. However, by Ziyue's mental strength was no longer what it used to be. It could now be released almost 1 meter away from his body. Naturally, it was not something that the weak spirituality in the golden thread saber could resist. Very soon, the small saber was contaminated with his own aura. In an instant, the resistance of the small knife became much weaker. Then, Ziyue increased the penetration of his mental strength. Soon, a mental connection was transmitted from the small golden knife. Chapter 94. With the guidance of my mind, I can finally freely control this golden thread saber. Ziyue's face revealed a trace of joy. Almost impatiently, the spiritual energy in his body followed the guidance of his mental energy and poured into the golden thread saber. Buzz! The small saber trembled and directly flew up, floating around Ziyue. Go! Sensing that he had complete control over the small saber, Ziyue's mind moved. In an instant, the golden thread saber shot out like lightning. Then, under his control, it wantonly rotated in the room. After a long time, Ziyue waved his hand slightly and recalled the golden thread saber. After all, I just refined it, so when I used it, it wasn't too smooth. Moreover, perhaps because my mental energy wasn't strong enough when the golden thread saber flew 5 or 6 meters away from me, the mental connection would begin to weaken. Once it was more than 10 meters away, the mental connection would be severed. In addition, the power of a magic weapon is related to the amount of spiritual energy I input. If I only control it to fly, 10 strands of spiritual energy per breath is enough. But if I want to use it to its full power, I need to input more than 100 strands of spiritual energy. However, the golden thread saber can only withstand 150 strands of spiritual energy. Once it exceeds that, the magic weapon itself has the possibility of being destroyed. Ziyue quickly came to a conclusion after many experiments. He was very clear about the strengths and weaknesses of this magic weapon. No matter what, this magic weapon can definitely be considered a great improvement to my strength. If it's unexpected, even a martial artist in the middle or late stage of internal refinement would have a hard time. Ziyue thought to himself as he put the golden thread saber at his waist, so that he could use it at any time with his mental energy. Is Ziyue here? At this moment, a deep voice came from outside the courtyard. Ziyue frowned and walked out of the room with his saber. He said, "Who's outside?" "Luha, the law enforcement hall." That voice sounded again. Ziyue's heart skipped a beat, but he quickly calmed down. He knew that Luha was a member of the left protector Zhao Jing's faction. He was also in charge of investigating Zhao Gongyi's disappearance. It was definitely not a good thing for him to come looking for him now. However, the current him was greatly different from before. He already had some confidence. When the door to the courtyard was opened, other than Luha, there was also a younger law enforcement disciple. He seemed to be called Ko Yun. However, from the way he stood, it was clear that Luha was the leader. Looking at their expressions, Ziyue said expressionlessly, "May I know why the 2 law enforcement disciples are looking for me?" "The left protector invites you in. Let's go." Luha looked at Ziyue and said matter-of-factly. Ziyue frowned and didn't move. He said softly, "You should always be on your guard when you lick the blood of Jianghu. Senior Marshal Brother Lu, you don't think that I will obediently follow you just because of your words, do you?" "What? Are you looking down on the left protector?" Lu's face instantly darkened. He said coldly, "What if I say that I need you to cooperate with the law enforcement hall's investigation of Zhao Gongyi's disappearance? I have also heard of Senior Marshal Brother Zhao's disappearance. I am also very sorry about this and hope that nothing happened to him. If you bring the law enforcement hall's Supervisor Tan's warrant, I will naturally cooperate. However, if Senior Marshal Brother Lu places a suspicious gaze on me and wants to take me away based on the fight between us before Senior Marshal Brother Zhao went missing, then you are wrong. Your empty words aren't enough," Ziyue said with a calm face. In the Scorching Sun Gang, the reason why most of the ordinary disciples feared the law enforcement disciples was not only because they were mostly stronger, but also because they had the right to investigate and execute punishments like the government. Sometimes, as long as they had any suspicions, they could directly bring people into the law enforcement hall for interrogation. However, everything was relative. As the disciple of the master, Ziyue had certain privileges. Without the warrant of the law enforcement hall's supervisor or even the master himself, ordinary law enforcement disciples had no right to handle him. "You!" Anger appeared on Lu's face, and his body suddenly tensed up. Ko Yin immediately became nervous, afraid that Lu He would really make a move. "What? You want to make a move?" "The people who live nearby are all disciples of the gang. Steward Zhang of the Internal Affairs Hall, Steward Tong of the Foreign Affairs Hall, and Steward Li all live here. I want to know what kind of punishment you will receive for plotting to murder the master's disciple. I think you should know the methods of the law enforcement hall better than I do. Ziyue's expression did not change, but his voice was somewhat cold. Let's go. With a muffled groan, Lu He hurriedly turned and left. Ko Yin secretly heaved a sigh of relief and hurriedly left as well. In the end, they still suspect me. Seeing the two of them leave, Ziyue's expression did not look good. He said softly, "Looking at their appearance, they won't let this matter rest." After thinking about it, Ziyue did not return to his room. Instead, he went straight to the master's residence. "I already know about this matter. I will send someone to warn Lu He and the others. However, I still have to ask you one thing. Did you kill Zhao Gongyi?" After hearing Ziyue's recount, Lu Dong asked in a deep voice. "No." Ziyue shook his head and said with certainty. Seeing this, Lu Dong nodded silently. He also did not believe that his disciple could kill Zhang Kuang and the other two who had reached the internal refinement realm. No matter how talented his disciple was, he still needed time to grow. At this time, he had only been practicing martial arts for 3 years. To be able to have such strength now was already far beyond his expectations. However, you should not go out during this period of time, in case something really happens. Immediately after, Lu Dong opened his mouth and said, "This disciple understands." Ziyue hurriedly nodded in agreement. Also, you have to be mentally prepared for the identity of an outstanding disciple. Lu Dong was silent for a while before speaking. Ziyue's heart tightened, and he hurriedly said, "Is there any change?" I also did not expect that Hall Master Li of the Wujiang County Scorching Sun Gang's headquarters had already started planning for the identity of an outstanding disciple a year ago. Hall Master Li has a son named Li Yinru. His talent and strength are quite extraordinary. Now, he has already received the recommendation of 3 supervisors. If the Left Guardian also agrees to support him as an outstanding disciple, given the relationship between the Left Guardian and the Elder Nye, your chances of being selected as an outstanding disciple are really not big. Of course, I will still say the same thing. I will fight for fairness for you. Next, I will ask Liu Yang, Tan Xiaofan, and Qin Yu to recommend you as an outstanding disciple. At that time, you should be able to fight for the opportunity to fight against Li Yinru. As for whether you can seize this opportunity or not, it will depend on you. Lu Dong said with a resolute face. As the headmaster of the Qinghe Town Scorching Sun Gang's branch, at least in this small area of Qinghe Town, his power was extremely great. Naturally, he was unhappy that Hall Master Li Zhao, who was far away in Wujiang County, had plotted against him. In addition, he had some grudges with Li Zhao. When he was sent to Qinghe Town in the past, Li Zhao had also put in a lot of effort. This time, even if it was not for his own disciple, he would not let Li Zhao have his way so easily. "Thank you, Master," Ziyue said with a face full of gratitude. After returning to his residence, Ziyue finally relaxed. There should be no more problems with the law enforcement hall. Even that Left Guardian Zhao Jing should not be able to make trouble for me on the surface. Next, I will do my best to prepare for the identity of an outstanding disciple. Ziyue thought to himself. He chuckled and did not pay too much attention to it. With his strength, if he really had a fair fight with that so-called Li Yinru, his opponent would not have any chance at all. The only thing that he was worried about was whether that Elder Nye would give him a chance to fight. In the next few days, Ziyue obeyed his master's instructions and obediently stayed in his courtyard. He did not go out at all. While he was immersed in his training, he was also silently thinking about his own way out. After all, Qinghe Town was still too small. Although there was no lack of experts, the opportunities for him to obtain martial skills were also relatively few. For example, even if he had enough silver to exchange for internal cultivation techniques, he did not dare to exchange them because of the recent rumors. If it was in the outside world, even in Wujiang County, he would not have this worry. This was because, according to what he knew, there were some businesses that could directly sell martial skills. Not only internal cultivation techniques, but there were even martial skills for cultivating inner strength. Unlike now, where he could only obtain them from the gang and had to do it secretly. The identity of an outstanding disciple is nothing to me. The most important thing is the opportunity to jump out of Chinatown. If he became an outstanding disciple, he would be able to take advantage of the opportunity to enter Wujiang County. Naturally, his chances would be much greater. As for the corresponding cultivation resources, he did not place too much importance on them. After confirming his way out, Ziyue did not stop cultivating. After a few days, his gains were also great. First of all, he could now skillfully and freely control the golden thread saber to rotate in the void. It was swift and nimble, allowing it to display even greater combat power. In addition, he had also successively cultivated the spiritual eye technique and the heavenly hand binding technique to the beginner level. Among them, the spiritual eye technique was indeed an excellent auxiliary technique. Once it was used, he could even sense the threads of spiritual qi in the void. When he looked at the people around him, he could clearly see the strength of their qi and blood, as well as whether there were any hidden injuries in their bodies. The only drawback was that when he looked at others, some people with sharp spiritual senses would often be able to sense it. Perhaps only when this spiritual eye technique is cultivated to a higher level will it not have these drawbacks. Ziyue thought to himself and did not feel disappointed. To him, any technique was worth paying attention to. With the wonders of the spiritual eye technique, it would definitely be of great help to him in the future. However, the heavenly hand binding technique was not of much help to him now. He would only have the opportunity to use it when he was close to others. However, it was still a rare and powerful martial skill. His master had relied on this martial skill to make a name for himself. Naturally, he would not give up on cultivating it. On this day, Ziyue was woken up by Lu Heng early in the morning. Then, he met up with his master and headed to Qinghe Wharf together. He knew that Elder Nya, who had been evaluated as an outstanding disciple, had finally arrived. Chapter 95. Qing River Pier. Sect Master Lu Dong, Left Protector Zhao Jing, Right Protector Lu Yang, and the other 5 supervisors were all present. In addition, some inner disciples like Ziyue, who had been accepted as disciples by experts above the level of supervisor, were mostly gathered at the pier. Qin Xiaoping, Wu Zhengyang, Lu Hu, and so on. But Ziyue was also among them. He saw a young man with a tall and straight figure and starry eyes. He was surrounded by several people and had a reserved and arrogant look on his face. Brother Bai, that person is said to be Li Yinru, the son of Wujiang County's Hall Master Li. He is here for the title of Outstanding Disciple. Qin Xiaoping approached Ziyue and whispered, "I know." Ziyue nodded and said calmly, "He's coming." Qin Xiaoping reminded. Ziyue turned his head and saw Li Yinru standing in front of him. "You must be Bai Shidi. You're really young. Only in a small place like Qingatown would a disciple of your age be qualified to compete for the title of Outstanding Disciple. However, I advise you to give up. Otherwise, you'll cry bitterly and never be able to recover after you fail." Li Yinru said with a smile. As soon as he said this, before Ziyue could say anything, the expressions of the people around him turned ugly. Weren't they from a small place like Qingatown? They were all proud and arrogant youths. Naturally, they would feel unhappy to be looked down upon. Some people's thoughts of fawning over them immediately faded. If I remember correctly, the Wujiang County headquarters has a total of 4 spots for Outstanding Disciple. You can't even fight for the top 4 and can only rely on schemes to seize the opportunities of others. What right do you have to mock others? Ziyue raised his eyebrows and said disdainfully. A few of the disciples in charge who surrounded Li Yinru seemed to be deep in thought when they heard this. Some people even felt that if Li Yinru wasn't born with a noble background and was the son of the Hall Master, he wouldn't be much stronger than them. For a moment, they all felt a little dull, and their desire to curry favor with him became even weaker. Li Yinru was at a loss for words. Anger flashed in his eyes as he said, "Even if I'm not worth mentioning in Wujiang County, it's enough to defeat you." "I hope so." Ziyue shrugged and didn't intend to bother. From the beginning to the end, he had never taken the other party seriously. Li Yinru was even angrier. Even in Wujiang County, no one dared to look down on him like that. However, just as he was about to continue pestering her, a tall dock gradually approached the shore. Then, the sect leader and the others immediately went up to greet them. Ziyue and the other juniors naturally had to follow. Soon, a silver-haired old man with a long sword on his back and a vigorous figure jumped off the ship lightly like a swallow without waiting for the dock to reach the shore. After flying for more than 10 meters, he gently touched the water surface and jumped up to the shore of the dock, which was 2 to 3 meters high. The kind of ease and naturalness was shocking. Good lightness skill. Elder Nye, I've been waiting for you for a long time. Lu Dong, the sect leader, said with a smile. Come on, we've prepared a banquet for you. Today, you'll definitely drink to your heart's content with Elder Nye. Haha, Lu Minju, you're too polite. The wine in Qinghe town is very famous. When I boarded the ship, I was craving for a mouthful of it. Nye Yunhao laughed heartily as he spoke boldly. Haha, we'll provide you with food and wine. Do you think we'll be afraid that you'll drink too much? Lu Dong also laughed and said. Well said, well said. Nye Yunhao said. He didn't ignore the other protectors and greeted them one after another. Looking at the situation, he was indeed more familiar with the left protector, Zhao Jing, and deliberately said a few more words. Finally, he said, there's no rush to drink. Let's first set the rules for the outstanding disciple selection. Since everyone is here, please mention who you've recommended so that I can make a judgment. Hearing this, the others hesitated for a while. Lu Dong then said, this time, there are only 2 people from our Qinghe town branch participating in the outstanding disciple selection. One is my disciple, Ziyue, and the other is Leader Li's son, Li Yinru. Li Zhao's son, Li Yinru? Nye Yunhao asked doubtfully. The others nodded one after another. Junior Li Yinru greets Elder Nye. Li Yinru hurriedly stepped forward and said with a respectful expression. Nye Yunhao nodded noncommittally. As a veteran of the Jianghu, he naturally knew what the other party was plotting. However, he didn't point it out and said, since there are only 2 people participating in the competition and the number of recommendations is roughly the same, then it's simple. The 2 of them will fight, and whoever wins will get the position of outstanding disciple. Do you have any objections to this? As it should be. Yes, yes. Everything will be decided by Elder Nye. The others agreed. This was something that everyone had expected. No one disagreed. Li Yinru couldn't wait for it to be so. In terms of talent, Li Yinru was 3 or 4 years older than Ziyue, but he was only at the external forging physique. Naturally, he was far inferior. But in terms of strength, he was not afraid. In fact, he was full of confidence. Well, 3 days later, the 2 of them will fight. Whoever wins will have the title of Outstanding Disciple. Elder Nye quickly made a decision. Then, the dock docked, and several of Elder Nye's subordinates who had come with him met up. The group then went directly to the Pearl Restaurant. Shopkeeper Li and the others, who had been prepared, greeted them from afar. Even old Mr. Ho, who rarely showed his face, waited there with a respectful face. He eagerly arranged for them to go to the private room upstairs. As for the disciples, although they were all on the 2nd floor, they could only be arranged at other tables. Only Ziyue and Li Yinru sat at the main table because of the competition for the title of Outstanding Disciple. The banquet began with a lot of compliments. It didn't take long for them to eat and drink their fill. Elder Nye muttered to himself for a moment before saying, actually, I have some plans for this trip. I need the help of the many brothers in the sect. As long as it can be used, Elder Nye, feel free to say it. Before Lu Dong said anything, Zhao Jing quickly said, what does Lu Minju think? Elder Nye looked at Lu Dong. Speaking of which, Lu Dong was the helmsman of the Qinghe town branch. Even if Elder Nye's status was higher and his strength was stronger, He couldn't go over Lu Dong and order his subordinates to do things for him. May I know what Elder Nye wants? Lu Dong muttered to himself and asked, although he drank a lot during the banquet. As someone who practiced martial arts, his digestive ability was naturally stronger. Apart from his face being a bit red, his mind was extremely clear. Looking at Ziwe and Li Inru, Eldon didn't care and said, I presume that as Qinghe Town locals, you should know about the demon incident 6 years ago. Ziwe's heart skipped a beat, and a strange expression appeared on his face. If he guessed correctly, what Elder Nye was talking about was very likely the serpent demon incident that happened at Lugang Temple on the southeast street. And from his conversation with the old scholar, he vaguely knew that there were still demons there. Connecting the dots, he couldn't help but feel a sense of absurdity. Could it be that the government didn't completely eliminate the demons back then? There is such a thing, but what does this have to do with Elder Nye's trip? Lu Dong asked calmly. If I say that the demon is still alive and is near Lugang Temple, what do you think? Although Nye Yunhao's voice was soft, it shocked everyone like thunder. That's impossible, right? Back then, it was Immortal Master Wu from the district headquarters who personally took action. Later, the government also announced that the serpent demon had already been eliminated. Water Supervisor Guo Liang said in disbelief. Only Lu Dong and a few others had a thoughtful expression in their eyes. Then have you seen the corpse of the serpent demon? Or have you only heard the announcement from the government and decided that the serpent demon was dead? Nye Yunhao countered with a question and then continued. Actually, I only found out by chance that Immortal Master Wu had the upper hand in the battle with the serpent demon. However, he only seriously injured the serpent demon. Later, the serpent demon escaped into the well. Immortal Master Wu was unable to fight it in the well, so he set up a sealing technique to suppress it in the well and prevent it from escaping. Thus, the peace of Qinghe Town was preserved for the past few years. As for the announcement that the serpent demon had been eliminated, I think it was done privately by the government to pacify the people. It's just that Immortal Master Wu didn't deny it. Then, what is Elder Nye's purpose? Please speak frankly. Lu Dong asked in a deep voice. To kill the demon and obtain its core. Nye Yunhao said, any demon must have a demon core in its body, and this demon core is a necessary material for refining some secret medicines. I happen to know an immortal master who is proficient in this field and can refine the Azure Sky Pill. Once successful, it will be enough to help martial artists break through the bottleneck of cultivation. This Nye has been at the peak of the third rate for nearly 10 years, so I naturally have to take a gamble. Perhaps I really have the possibility of stepping into the second rate. Of course, after this matter is done, the benefits for all of you will not be small. And if there are many Azure Sky Pills, it's not impossible to get a share of the profits. How many Azure Sky Pills can be made from one demon core? A shrewd look flashed on Lu Dong's face as he asked. 7, at most 10. Nye Yunhao's expression was slightly ugly, but he still answered. All right, if the pills are successfully made, we will need 5. In addition, the snake demon's flesh will also belong to our branch. Lu Dong said in a firm tone. He knew that the Elder Nye's words must be exaggerated, so he demanded an exorbitant price. All right, but I will also need you to provide some supplementary materials. After all, this Nye has spent a lot for this alchemy. Nye Yunhao pondered for a moment and nodded in agreement. Naturally, no problem, Lu Dong said straightforwardly. The other people's expressions were slightly unnatural. The Azure Sky Pill could be used by third-rate martial artists to cultivate and break through, so it was definitely a good thing. However, although they were also in charge of the sect, they could not even cultivate inner force, so they naturally did not have the qualifications to enjoy it. At this moment, they could only reveal envious expressions as they looked at the few people who had cultivated inner force. Fortunately, the sect master was fair and knew to leave behind the snake demon's flesh. With the demon's vigorous chi and blood, it was not impossible for them to take a step further and truly cultivate inner force. Chapter 96. Walking out of the restaurant's private room, Zu's gaze instinctively scanned his surroundings. Very quickly, his gaze froze. It was normal for martial artists to be able to see and hear everything. However, this time, his gaze shifted and he suddenly saw a somewhat familiar figure who happened to be walking out of the restaurant. Even though he had only caught a glimpse of the person when he first saw him, his face was deeply etched in his memory. If he had guessed correctly, the figure he had just seen was very likely one of the murderers who had killed the Li clan 3 years ago, the third chief of the Ghost Head stronghold, the Diamond Body Wu Yong. As one of the largest bandit leaders in the vicinity of Qinghe Town, his appearance in Qinghe Town was definitely not a good thing. What's wrong? Just at this moment, the sect leader and the others had also walked out. Lu Dong asked in confusion. Nothing. Shaking his head, Zu's gaze became calm once again. No matter what the other party's goal was, it had nothing to do with him. He did not want to waste any more effort. The next day, the entire Scorching Sun gang began to bustle with activity. Almost everyone who was free was given a task to evacuate the crowd near the Willow Gang Temple on South Street. Fortunately, the Willow Gang Temple was gradually becoming desolate. In addition, the Scorching Sun gang was the largest gang in Qinghe Town. Naturally, no one dared to resist. Brother Bai, is there really a snake demon in the Willow Gang Temple? Qin Xiaoping curiously looked at the temple that was now much more desolate and asked. There should be. Ziyue looked at a dry well not far from the Willow Gang Temple. His face twitched and he felt slightly complicated. He even felt a little scared. Back then, he had fought with Wu Hao, the disciple of the Fifth Channel leader, and had even thrown his corpse into the dry well. If he had known that there was a snake demon hiding in the dry well, no matter how bold he was, he would not have dared to meet Wu Hao here, let alone throw his corpse into the well. What scared him the most was that, if his memory served him right, he had used a huge rock to block the well after he had dumped the corpse. That boulder weighed at least 150 kilograms. An ordinary person would find it difficult to even push it. However, that boulder had already rolled 4 to 5 meters away. It was hard to say whether this was done by someone or by the monster in the well. I wonder what that snake demon looks like. With the strength of Sect Master and Elder Nya, they should be able to get rid of that demon. Qin Xiaoping said excitedly. That's hard to say. No one knows how strong the snake demon is. Anyway, let's not get too close later. Otherwise, if we touch it lightly, we might die here. Ziyue frowned and reminded him solemnly. Although he had never seen the strength of a monster, he had witnessed the terror of a spirit monster. It was only a ghostwood tree spirit that had just become a spirit, but it already had such great strength. It was bound to be a monster that was even more powerful than a spirit monster, and even more terrifying. Not to mention, this snake demon was able to escape from Immortal Master Wu's hands, so it must have some extraordinary methods. It would not be killed so easily. Qin Xiaoping nodded solemnly. Naturally, he would not treat his life as a joke. The dry well is intact. It seems that the snake demon has not been able to escape. Left Protector Lu Yong looked at the old well at the entrance of the Willow Gang Temple and nodded slightly. That's not necessarily true. A middle-aged man who came with Elder Nya shook his head with a grave expression and said, At this time, I can almost see that Immortal Master Wu's method of sealing the snake demon was actually to set up a formation. With the help of the flourishing incense in the Willow Gang Temple, the monster was unable to escape. However, as you can see, the Willow Gang Temple has been completely abandoned, so the incense is naturally impossible to talk about. Hearing this, the other people's expressions changed. They did not doubt this person's words, because from the previous introduction, they understood that this person was called Xiang Shang. He was a cultivator of the way of immortality. Not to mention his strength, his knowledge in this area was naturally far superior to theirs. Is the snake demon still in the dry well? Lu Yong immediately asked somewhat anxiously. It should still be here. The snake demon seems to have already treated the dry well as its nest. Xiang Shang held a round disc in his hand, and on the disc was a needle that was rapidly spinning. He could not help but have a strange expression as he spoke. As long as it's still here, it's fine. Begin the preparations. Lu Dong heard this and breathed a sigh of relief. He also placed great importance on this operation. Not only did the sect send out all of its elites, but in order to get the authorities to agree to their operation, they also made a promise to protector Yang Zhongling. In an instant, for inner refinement level martial artists, each carried a huge bag and quickly moved forward. Release. Immediately after, the bag suddenly scattered. In an instant, countless amounts of realgar powder scattered and rushed into the dry well. Retreat. The four of them each increased their speed to the maximum and quickly retreated behind the sect leader and the others. Lu Minju's idea is still ingenious. He actually thought of using the realgar to force the snake demon out. Elder Nye held a long sword in his hand and praised with a face full of admiration. Although the snake demon is strong, its nature of not liking the taste of realgar is still there. I just used it slightly. Whether or not we can kill the snake demon later depends on Elder Nye. Lu Dong did not claim credit, but his eyes were still fixed on the dry well. His body was tense, and he seemed to be somewhat nervous. Gulp, gulp, gulp. After what seemed like a long time, and also like a moment, a violent sound of water rolling suddenly sounded. Immediately after, splash, a violent sound of water splashing. Boom. An incomparably huge snake head suddenly rushed out of the dry well. The pitch-black snake was like a flood dragon emerging from the sea. Under the rush, it actually carried a few hundred pounds of well water with it. The water from the well splashed down, drenching the surrounding area within a radius of tens of meters. Some of it even splashed on the bodies of the scorching Sun Gang disciples. The cold well water soaked them, making them shiver all over. However, at this moment, none of the disciples cared about the water drops on their bodies. They all stared at the shocking giant snake with their mouths agape. The ferocious snake's head was the size of a water tank. Its two eyes were like copper bells as it coldly stared at everyone around it. Its protruding tongue was like lightning as it swiftly flashed. The scales on the nearly 20-meter-long snake's body were arranged in a picturesque manner. Anyone who saw them could see how tough they were. However, what really shocked people was the murderous aura emitted from the giant snake. Being stared at by it, almost everyone felt a kind of fear in their hearts. Some of the more timid ones even trembled between their thighs. Qin Xiaoping's face was pale. Ziyue's face was also not calm. Even though he was hundreds of meters away from the giant snake, he could not help but have the thought of turning around and running away in his heart. It was unrivaled. Is this a demon? Ziyue resisted the discomfort in his heart and tightly held the hilt of his saber in his hand. Kill! A fierce shout suddenly came out. Immediately after, Nie Yunhao's sword flashed and rushed toward the giant snake with incomparable speed. Beside him, Lu Dong did not say anything, but also rushed out quickly. Following closely behind were the left guardian Zhao Jing, the right guardian Lu Yang, and a middle-aged warrior who came with Elder Nye. It was said that his strength had already reached the inner Qi realm. Even if the giant snake seemed to be invincible, how could an expert who could cultivate inner force be a simple person? Naturally, he was not affected. As for the remaining 5 managers who were at the peak of inner refinement, they only regained their senses after Elder Nye's shout. They nervously surrounded Elder Nye. Hiss! The giant snake's forked tongue quickly protruded, and a trace of anger flashed in its bell-like eyes. Its body twisted and its mouth opened. In an instant, a jet of pitch-black venom was spat out. Elder Nye's body was as light as a swallow. He quickly rose into the air and dodged it. Stepping on the void, he actually rose nearly 10 feet higher. The sword light turned into rain like blooming lotuses. After the lotuses bloomed, they suddenly closed. Green lotus sword technique. The long sword suddenly pierced the giant snake's neck. It was only a slight obstruction, but it was pierced by Elder Nye's inner force, and then pierced deep into the snake's body. Sizzle, sizzle, sizzle. Sounds of intense corrosion could be heard. A large part of the originally smooth bluestone ground was instantly corroded. The The weeds that grew around the bluestone ground also fell and withered. Lu Dong and the others dodged the area where the venom had corroded and attacked the giant snake with all their weapons. Clang, clang, clang. The martial arts technique that was infused with inner force was extremely powerful. However, the disorderly scales on the giant snake's body were not just for decoration. Other than Elder Nie's sword that pierced through the snake's body at the beginning, only the sect leader's weapon that looked like a sharp thorn pierced deeply into the snake's body. The others only broke the scales on the giant snake's body and at most pierced it slightly. Compared to the giant snake's body, it was not painful at all. Roar! The giant snake roared as if it was endlessly angry. The snake's tail was like a whip as it suddenly swung out. Bang! The field supervisor, In Jixing, could not dodge in time and was hit by the snake's tail. Even though he hurriedly used his long saber to block in front of him, he could not withstand the enormous force. He was directly thrown more than 10 meters away and landed heavily on the ground. A mouthful of blood spurted out like rain and mist. He was already seriously injured. Immediately after, everyone suddenly felt that the void suddenly became cold. The air seemed to have solidified, and there was an inexplicable aura that filled the air. Not good, demonic arts. Standing in the distance, Xiang Shang, who was condensing a spell, had a change in expression. He shouted and finally shot out a long arrow that seemed to be completely condensed from bluestone. Spell, stone arrow technique. Boom! The stone arrow that was more than 2 meters long was like a bolt of lightning. It hit the giant snake hard, causing its scales to crack and its flesh to burst open. Its body trembled slightly and arched. However, his attack did not manage to interrupt the giant snake's spell casting in the end. In the void, sharp icicles suddenly condensed one after another. Countless icicles shot out like raindrops as soon as they appeared. Chapter 97. Retreat. With a loud roar, Ne Yunhao quickly brandished the sword in his hand, transforming it into a screen that blocked all the icicles. Lu Dong held the spike in one hand to block the icicles, while his other hand moved like a phantom. Any icicles that got close to him were easily deflected by him. However, the others were not so lucky. Apart from Zhao Jing, Lu Yang, and a few other inner chi stage martial artists who could barely resist the attack, Qin Yu and the other 4 managers flew back at the first moment. However, they were still in a very sorry state when they resisted the attack. Occasionally, icicles would fall on their bodies. Even though they had trained their bodies to the peak, they were still injured by the icicles. Hiss! The giant snake once again let out a loud hiss, and its entire body shot out in an instant. Almost in an instant, it was already in front of Lu Dong. The snake opened its mouth wide and was about to swallow him whole. Sensing the strong stench coming from the snake's mouth, Lu Dong's heart skipped a beat. He bent his body, bounced, and retreated rapidly. At the same time, his hands moved quickly on his weapon, the piercer. His hands were like phantoms, and in an instant, the piercer began to spin. Go! The piercer shot out from his hands like a bolt of lightning and almost instantly shot into the snake's mouth. Poof! The piercer, infused with all his strength, pierced deeply into the snake's body, wreaking havoc and destroying everything in the snake's body. Heaven-binding hands! Ziyue's eyes lit up. His master's technique had greatly shocked him. The way he fiddled with the piercer could actually make the weapon shoot out, like a hidden weapon. He had a feeling in his heart that the power of his master's attack had far exceeded the power of the golden thread saber that he could control. The heaven-binding hands is indeed impressive. Nie Yunhao also let out a sigh of admiration. Hiss, hiss! The giant snake let out a painful hiss, and its body twisted violently. The bluestone paved road cracked inch by inch, and some places even caved in deeply. A nearby house was swept by the giant snake's tail and directly collapsed into pieces. Now's the time. Lu Dong didn't care about the loss of his weapon and quickly roared. Following that, dozens of experts from the gang quickly rushed out. Every 3 or 4 people carried a layer of fishing net and directly covered the giant snake's body. Layers of fishing nets fell. Even though most of them missed, there were still 3 or 4 layers of fishing nets that directly enveloped the giant snake. Pull. Everyone worked together and quickly straightened the fishing net. Turn. They pulled the fishing net and spun it quickly, trying to entangle the giant snake. Hiss. The giant snake roared loudly, and its strength tightened. Its body suddenly shot forward, and with an irresistible force, it quickly rushed in a certain direction. 7 to 8 inner refinement realm warriors could not hold it back at all. The fishing net cracked as a result, and the huge snake's huge body quickly crashed into 2 people's bodies. Crackling sounds of bones breaking could be heard as the internal organs of the 2 were torn apart by the tremendous force. Clumps of blood kept flowing out from their mouths. Soon they stopped breathing, paying no attention to the 2 dead martial artists. The giant snake twisted its body again and opened its mouth. Instantly, another mouthful of venom was rapidly spat out. My face! An incomparably loud scream of pain sounded. The 2 martial artists who were pulled close by the huge force could not dodge in time and were directly enveloped by the venom. In the blink of an eye, the skin of the 2 people was rapidly corroded, and the venom quickly invaded their internal organs. Even if the 2 of them had already cultivated to the level of inner refinement of their internal organs, they could not withstand it. Very quickly, they lay on the ground, trembling. Seeing this, the others could not help but feel fear in their hearts, and quickly retreated. Elder Nya, if you don't act, we can only retreat. Lu Dong shouted sternly. The terror of this snake demon had exceeded his expectations. Don't worry, Nye Yunhao responded, and like a swallow, he quickly charged towards the giant snake. In order to kill the demon this time, he had naturally made all the necessary preparations. He knew the strength of a mortal Master Wu. He was one of the few people in the entire Wujiang County who had cultivated to the 7th level of Qi refinement. The snake demon's means were naturally extraordinary to be able to escape from him. Suddenly, he threw out a special stone slab, the soul stabilizing plate. This was an item of the county city's military. It was said that it was an excellent weapon for the military to deal with monsters and other anomalies, as well as cultivators. Of course, it was also effective against martial artists. He had borrowed this piece because he was familiar with a certain deputy general, and he had to return it within a month. Buzz! The stone slab trembled and suddenly emitted a strange fluctuation. In an instant, the snake demon, which was originally unparalleled in power, suddenly trembled as if it was frozen. Then, Nye Yunhao's figure quickly rushed out. With a swoosh, the sword light flashed and fell like a waterfall. Poof! On the head of the giant snake, an incomparably huge wound instantly split open. Whoosh! Another sword fell, and the blade entered the snake demon's bones, cutting off a large piece of flesh. Only then did the others react. They quickly rushed in front of the giant snake, and all kinds of weapons fell continuously. Hiss, hiss! After a full 3 breaths of time, the snake monster finally broke free from the shackles of the soul fixation plate and let out a hurried hissing sound. Not bothering to stay any longer, the snake monster shot forward, knocking aside a cultivator who was blocking its path and quickly escaping. Quick, stop it! Lu Dong was anxious. With a roar, his inner strength surged, and his body shot out like a wisp of smoke. Several internal refinement martial artists happened to be in the direction of the snake demon's ejection, and all of them turned pale with fright as they dodged. Even though the snake demon was now riddled with wounds, its momentum and power were still terrifying. They blocked its path like a mantis trying to stop a chariot. Perhaps they could be of some use and block it, but they would definitely die. When faced with a truly desperate situation of life and death, very few people would not hesitate. It was human nature to be afraid of death. It was already good enough that they could throw out their weapons to block it. It can't run away. At the crucial moment, Nye Yunhao lightly shouted. His body shot out, and at the moment when the giant snake was about to break out of the encirclement, he chased after it. He threw away the long sword in his hand, and with a press of his hands, he directly hugged the snake demon's tail. His footsteps stopped, and a powerful force burst out, and he threw the snake demon's tail. Boom! The snake demon, which was almost 10,000 pounds, was thrown to the ground like a long rope. Boom! 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 Although Nye Yunhao's body was thin and weak, and he even looked a little old, his strength was terrifying. At this moment, he was hugging the snake's tail and violently swinging it, which really made people stunned. Too violent, too powerful. Qin Xiaoping opened his mouth wide, and his face was filled with shock and envy. He himself also practiced swordsmanship, so he naturally paid more attention to Elder Nye, who also practiced swordsmanship. The exquisiteness of his opponent's swordsmanship was also an eye-opener for him. But at this moment, Elder Nye Yunhao's action of not using his sword and violently throwing the giant snake made him feel a sense of absurdity. This is a warrior. The stronger one is the higher one's realm, and the stronger one's strength. As Zue spoke, his body moved, and he quickly approached the battlefield. He felt that the snake demon was probably going to die soon. Even if he was not the one who killed such a powerful snake demon, it would still bring him a large amount of soul energy. This kind of opportunity was very rare, and he naturally did not want to miss it. "Hey, Brother Bai, what are you doing there?" Qin Xiaoping looked puzzled, but he could not help but run over. The closer he got, the more he could feel the strength of the snake demon. It was almost 20 meters long, and its waist was as thick as a human body. In addition, it had a huge and ferocious snake head. Just looking at it was enough to make people tremble in fear, not to mention facing it and becoming an enemy. Thinking that he had been so close to such a monster, Ziyue felt a chill in his heart. Boom! After nearly 20 swings, there was almost no part of the snake demon's body that was intact. The originally disorderly scales on its body were also broken, and traces of blood flowed out of its flesh and blood. Die! A figure quickly leaped out, and in a flash, the long saber in his hand was sharp, and in an instant, it ruthlessly pierced into the head of the snake demon. Hiss! The giant snake let out a final hiss, and its long tail quickly swung, as if it was a conditioned reflex. Boom! Rubble flew in all directions. Ziyue's eyes were like lightning, and he quickly pulled out his knife, directly cutting a fist-sized rock that was rushing toward him into 2 pieces. What a fast knife! Nye Yunhao's eyes lit up, and he could not help but praise. Only then did the snake's tail suddenly stiffen and gradually droop down. The giant snake also lost its breath and did not move at all. It's finally dead. In order to take it down, I really put in a lot of effort. Tan Xiaofan sighed with emotion, and his eyes finally showed a trace of relief. After all, it's a monster. Of course it's powerful. But this time, our gang also suffered a lot of losses. For internal refinement, disciples died directly, and those who participated in the battle were more or less injured. It will probably take some time for them to recover. Internal Affairs Supervisor Lu Yanhong's face was a little pale, and the clothes on her shoulders were a little torn, revealing her bleeding skin. She was also slightly injured. But it's all worth it. No matter what kind of monster it is, there will be a lot of good things on it. This snake demon is so powerful. Naturally, there will be more good things on it. Only its monster elixir is enough to compensate for the losses, not to mention the scales on its body, which are more than enough to make 2 soft armors. There's also the snake tendon, which is a good material for making bowstrings. Even if it can't be made because of the restrictions, it can be sold to the military for a good price. There's also the snake demon's flesh and blood. With so much of it, it's estimated that the strength of the disciples in the gang will be greatly improved, and there might even be 1 or 2 more internal Qi warriors among you. Liu Yang pulled the knife out of the snake demon's head and said with a smile, "When warriors practice martial arts, it was naturally important to practice hard, but at the same time, there are also various kinds of resources to accelerate the speed of cultivation. The flesh and blood of a monster could increase the amount of qi and blood, far surpassing the amount of strange beasts. In addition to the nourishment of the monster's unique spiritual substance, it was really possible for warriors at the peak of internal refinement to take a step further to cultivate their internal chi. Chapter 98. Spiritual Energy plus 5,284. Ziyue couldn't help but reveal a trace of joy on his face. A full 5,000 points of spiritual energy was definitely the largest amount he had obtained in a long time. At the same time, it also caused his spiritual energy to soar. Next, the only thing that will trouble me is the internal cultivation technique. Now, with the contribution points in silver, it should be enough to exchange for the golden cicada technique. With the internal cultivation technique, my martial arts can continue to improve and reach the level of master and elder Nya. Ziyue's eyes lit up, and he couldn't help but reveal a trace of anticipation. The battle strength that Master and Elder Nya had displayed in this battle against the snake demon was extremely powerful and naturally made him yearn for it. Next, there would naturally be specialized people coming over to deal with the snake demon. 2 intersect martial artists who were proficient in knife techniques, as well as masterly from the kitchen, were specially called over and began to deal with the giant snake. Pieces of snake scales were picked up and put away. Even the snake's skin was specially peeled off. The poison sac, fangs, and even the copper bell-like eyeball. Then very quickly they took out a fist-sized dark yellow bead from the snake demon's head. A monster core. Almost everyone's breathing became hurried and mournful when they saw the bead. They also had a judgment in their hearts. This was because even though the bead's appearance was unremarkable, the spiritual energy that belonged to a monster core was too abundant. Especially for people with sharp spiritual senses like Ziyue, who could sense it from far away. Moreover, with just a slight comparison, Ziyue judged that the spiritual energy of this monster core far surpassed that of the locust tree spirit's wood heart. Elder Nya carefully placed the monster core in a wooden box with a brocade cloth at the bottom. He didn't have any intention of continuing to watch and directly left. To him, half of the purpose of this trip had already been achieved. Next, all he had to do was to select the most outstanding disciples, and everything would be fine. At this moment, he was even somewhat impatient. Early the next morning, Ziyue went out. He climbed up the heavy inkstone mountain with ease and familiarity. Half an hour later, the sun had completely risen, and Ziyue had also finished his daily cultivation. However, this time, he did not leave the mountain immediately. Instead, he waited at the top of the mountain. Not long after, he saw a figure walking up the mountain unhurriedly. Yesterday, your scorching sun gang went to Lugang Temple to kill demons? The old scholar asked impatiently the moment he saw Ziyue. Nodding his head, Ziyue calmly said, "A snake demon. You leaked the information?" Recalling that Ziyue had asked him in a roundabout way, the old scholar couldn't help but ask, "No." Ziyue shook his head and did not explain. That's good too. It could be considered as settling one of my worries. The old scholar murmured with a complicated look on his face. Old scholar, I don't have the ability. Now that this snake demon has died in the hands of others, it could be considered as revenge for you, master. Your master? The previous temple attendant of Lugang Temple, He Shofeng? Ziyue couldn't help but ask curiously. That's right. Back then, it was actually my master who first discovered the snake demon. However, when he fought with the snake demon, his strength was lacking and he was swallowed by the snake demon. After that, the news of the demon disaster spread. Coincidentally, the state preceptor was in power and the celestial master pavilion had been suppressing the path of incense. Naturally, they took advantage of the situation and placed the blame of the demon disaster on my dead master. The old elementary scholar explained with a look of anger and helplessness on his face. In response, Ziyue didn't know how to respond. The struggles of the upper echelons were too far away from him. He wasn't qualified to comment. All right, let's cut to the chase. This is the Jade Scroll for the Lightning Strike technique. I've already prepared it for you. Also, I brought some incense for the deal we talked about last time. I wonder if you... The old scholar seemed to know that some things were inconvenient to say to others and quickly changed the topic. Immediately after, he flipped his hand and a flat and round jade scroll appeared. Without hesitation, he directly handed it to Ziyue. This was also the compensation that they had agreed on. He didn't have any thoughts of breaking his promise. Of course, I've brought the talismans. Bai Ziyue also spoke and took out a large stack of talismans from his bosom. Thus, very quickly, the sound of bargaining could be heard from the top of the heavy ink mountain. 10 minutes later, Ziyue and the old scholar separated and walked down the mountain with a satisfied look on his face. 50 to 60 talismans of various types were exchanged for more than 10 incense sticks this time. Among them, there were 3 spirit-gathering incense and 1 soul-calming incense. As for the soul-attracting incense, Ziyue exchanged for a total of 8 sticks. The spirit-gathering incense's function was needless to say. It was used to restore one's mental strength. With the strength of his mental strength, even if it was exhausted, 1 stick would be enough to restore it. As for the soul-calming incense, it was a type of incense that could calm one's mind. It had an extremely powerful effect on people whose minds were disturbed. Of course, he could also light it when he was cultivating magic arts or martial arts. It would also increase his concentration and efficiency. Of course, the effects varied from person to person. Ziyue felt that he was quite focused when cultivating and wasn't easily distracted. Thus, he only switched to another stick to test the effects. However, the soul-attracting incense had the effect of attracting ghosts and ghosts. This caused his mind to be somewhat shaken. He was already quite vexed about his lack of spiritual energy. If he could use the soul-attracting incense to attract ghosts and then kill them, it would naturally allow his spiritual energy to rapidly increase. To him, this was an additional method to steadily increase his spiritual energy. The effects would naturally be much better than slaughtering livestock every day. Not long after, Ziyue descended the mountain and arrived at the street. However, he quickly discovered that the atmosphere on the street was somewhat strange. The conversations of the people had clearly lowered their voices. Soon after, cries of surprise could be heard. He rubbed his nose. For martial artists, their lowered voices naturally couldn't escape his ears. Very quickly, he had a rough idea of what was going on. First of all, it was naturally the matter of the Scorching Sun gang killing demons. This time, the Scorching Sun gang had practically turned out in full force. They had caused a huge commotion and had even asked some people who lived in Willow Gang Temple to leave. Naturally, it had attracted the attention and curiosity of some people. The disciples of the gang weren't lacking in those who liked to boast and brag. Even if they had nothing to do, they would boast about a huge wave of things. Not to mention that this was a real demon-killing operation. Thus, they immediately spouted lotus flowers from their mouths and spilled the beans. In just one morning, almost everyone in Qinghetown knew about the Scorching Sun Gang's demon-killing operation. This actually made the Scorching Sun Gang's reputation even greater. Even when he passed by his aunt's stall, Bai Erniu pulled him and mysteriously asked him nonstop. However, this was only the first thing that had happened yesterday. The second thing had shocked Ziyue himself. A family extermination. Last night, another family extermination had occurred. Not only had the ancient Rhyme Pavilion's shopkeeper been killed, even the accompanying caravan had been massacred. There were over 60 people in total, and not a single one had escaped. When he first heard this news, he was truly dumbfounded. However, he immediately came to his senses and thought of the Li family extermination 3 years ago. The same method, the same one-hit kill, clean and efficient. Especially when he had seen the third chief of the Ghost Head stronghold, the diamond body Wu Yong's figure before this family extermination. Thus, he immediately determined that this time, it was definitely the Ghost Head stronghold's doing. The other party's viciousness was something he had personally witnessed 3 years ago. Furthermore, he soon verified this point from the mouths of the people around him. I really can't live like this anymore. Originally, in the entire town, only the ancient Rhyme Pavilion's caravan could enter the county through the official road. Previously, I was still thinking of using my connections to follow the ancient Rhyme Pavilion's caravan. Who would have thought that in just one night, the ancient Rhyme Pavilion would be gone? This ghost head stronghold is truly ruthless. There's no choice. It's the ancient Rhyme Pavilion's fault for not knowing what's good for them. They can't do business properly, but they had to go against the ghost head stronghold. They're bandits, and you're just a merchant. How can you fight them? That's true. The ghost head stronghold relies on the road to make a living. Not only did you not pay the toll, you even killed people to resist. However, the ghost head stronghold is so crazy. Are they really not afraid of the authorities? Afraid? If they're afraid, they won't do anything. Hearing the discussions, Ziwe could not help but reveal a trace of confusion on his face. He already knew about the grudge between the ancient Rhyme Pavilion and the ghost head stronghold. He knew that behind the ancient Rhyme Pavilion was the Leaf family that had been massacred. It was very normal for them to go against the ghost head stronghold. However, since the ghost head stronghold had already started to tolerate it, and had even allowed the ancient Rhyme Pavilion's caravans to pass through their official roads without stopping them, they should not have suddenly become so crazy. It did not seem like they had reached the end of their tolerance. Instead, it was more like something had happened that caused them to make such a decision. Wait, could it be Li Hun? Hue suddenly remembered the conversation between the two traveling merchants. From them, Ziyu knew that the eldest son of the Li family, Li Qing, was running a business. However, the third son of the Li family was already a high scholar, and now had the chance to become the county's registrar. Obviously, the matter of Li Hun becoming the registrar must have been set in stone. Or perhaps there was some other change that caused the ghost head stronghold to do such a crazy act of revenge. As he thought about it, Ziyue shook his head and did not think about it any further. He had his own things to do. As long as the disputes in the outside world did not affect him, he did not want to care too much about them. Even if he wanted to do something with his current strength, he did not have the strength to do so. On the streets, he could clearly see that there were many people from the authorities searching. When they saw suspicious people, they would intentionally stop and question them. Even if the results were not great, and the constables were mostly acting, it was enough to see how important this matter was to the authorities. Moreover, he quickly realized that there were people from his own gang who were also searching. Just as he was about to go forward and ask, a low howl suddenly came from not far away. Chapter 99. Turning his gaze, Ziyue soon saw a puppy covered in mud and all kinds of filth. Its fur was all congealed together. It was being kicked away. With just a glance, Ziyue determined that the young man in embroidered clothes must have felt that the puppy was too close to him. So he kicked it. Oh, the puppy rolled, shook its body, and stood up again. Its eyes were fierce. Taking advantage of the man's unpreparedness, it quickly rushed over to bite him. You're courting death. Feeling the pain in his leg, the man's expression changed, and he kicked again. With a loud thud, the puppy was kicked directly against the wall before it rolled down. At this time, the puppy's breath was much weaker, and one of its legs was broken. It whimpered and struggled a few times before it stood up with a limp. Just when Ziyue thought that it would run away with its tail between its legs, and the young man in embroidered clothes obviously thought the same and did not intend to pay attention to it, the puppy rushed toward the young man in embroidered clothes again. Even though it could not stand steadily and almost rolled down again, it still struggled to bite the young man in embroidered clothes. This is really strange. The young man in embroidered clothes was angry. He kicked the puppy again. After sending it flying, he took 2 steps forward and kicked its head. After 2 or 3 kicks, the young man felt relieved. He did not pay attention to it and left directly. Ziyue, who was standing not far away, witnessed the whole scene. He frowned slightly. He did not want to pay attention to it, but when he saw the puppy stubbornly fighting back, even though it was injured, he felt a little touched in his heart. Perhaps in the eyes of others, this was a little stupid, but Ziyue read a trace of the way of life from the puppy's ignorant eyes. After thinking about it, Ziyue still approached. He naturally felt that the puppy was not dead, but if no one paid attention to it, it would definitely die in a few hours. As he approached, a smell of someone trying to snatch it immediately spread out. Ziyue thought to himself, no wonder that person was so disgusted. Just the smell alone was not something that anyone could stand. He naturally did not want to touch the extremely dirty puppy, so he quickly took out a talisman. Cleansing talisman. This time, he had exchanged it with old Shio. Because the cleansing talisman was easy to draw and could be completed with a wave of the hand, he had drawn several of them. However, old Shio was obviously not interested in these talismans that could not exert any power, so he left them all on him. Looking left and right, Ziwa saw that no one was paying attention to it, so he activated his energy. Instantly, a green light fell on the puppy's body. In an instant, the puppy that was originally dirty and stinky, and even its fur became much softer and smoother. When he looked at the puppy again, he immediately found it much more pleasing to the eye. From the looks of it, it was at most 1 or 2 months old. It was unknown what it had experienced, but other than a wound caused by the youth in embroidered clothes, there were many other scars all over its body. Of the bitches of the puppy, of the puppyess of the puppies, the puppy ends of the bit. No wonder the puppy's smell was so pungent. Based on its condition, even if it had not been kicked by old Shio, it would not have lived for long and would have died from the infection of its wounds. However, thinking of how old Shio had been bitten by the puppy, Ziyue's face could not help but reveal a strange expression. If the other party's luck was not good enough, it was very likely that he would fall ill with rabies. He did not know if this kind of incurable disease could be cured in this world. Based on the other party's attire, he would not have to worry about medical expenses. A cleansing talisman naturally had no healing effect. The puppy's breath was still very weak, and it did not even have the strength to move. However, the rate of its chest rising and falling was obviously greater than before. Its complexion was also better than before, and it did not have the feeling that it would die at any time. Whether or not you can live depends on your own luck. Ziyue picked up the puppy and placed it in his hand. He gave up on the idea of continuing to ask his fellow disciples and headed straight home. Soon, Ziyue arrived near his residence. From afar, he saw a figure waiting at the door of his house. Senior Lu Heng, is something the matter with Master? Ziyue greeted from afar and asked curiously. This figure was Lu Dong's nephew, Lu Heng. The other party was not difficult to get along with, but perhaps he was born not good with words. Generally, if it was not the sect leader's order, he would not take the initiative to come here. At this time, he was also carrying a heavy cloth bag in his hand. From the bottom of the cloth bag, there was a faint trace of oil seeping out. Seeing this, Bai Ziyue's heart skipped a beat. Bai Shidi, I knew that you must have gone out early in the morning, so I waited here for a while. Lu Heng said. When he saw the puppy in Ziyue's hand, he was slightly surprised and said, I didn't expect Junior Brother to have a dog. But looking at it, it seems to be dying. I happened to come across it, so I picked it up. Ziyue explained. Nodding, Lu Heng did not mind. He slightly handed over the cloth bag in his hand and said, That's right, this is the snake demon meat that the sect leader asked me to send to you. It is said that it contains a special kind of spiritual energy. For us martial artists, it has extraordinary effects. Not only can it greatly increase the density of blood and qi, it can also speed up the progress of external forging and internal refining. I heard that the essence of the meat is even useful for peak internal refining experts like Manager Chinyu. If they eat a lot of it, it can help them advance further and cultivate internal energy. The sect leader specially left this piece for you. He even took a little of it from his share. Don't look at it as a small bag. It is more than 100 jin. The meat is firm, so you have to cook it with more water. Ziyue's face was somewhat stiff. He said hesitantly, No need, right? Why? Are you afraid of snakes? But the sect leader said that it is good for your training. You will soon compete with that Li Yinru for the position of the most outstanding disciple. With an increase in blood and qi, your strength will also increase. With an increase in strength, your chances of winning will increase, right? Others can't even envy you. Even if you are afraid of snakes, you have to endure it. Lu Heng looked at Ziyue strangely and hurriedly tried to persuade him. All right. Ziyue could only nod and take it. How was he afraid of snakes? He clearly remembered that he had thrown Wu Hao and a zombie's corpse into the dry well. Now, he didn't need to think to know that they had entered the snake demon's stomach. In addition, he knew that during the demon disaster, the snake demon had swallowed many people. Even the old scholar's master, He Shofeng, had been swallowed by the snake demon. No matter how much he wanted to increase his strength, he still wouldn't eat the snake meat. However, in front of Lu Heng, he couldn't refuse. At most, he would throw it away or give it to someone else. After returning to the courtyard, Ziyue first put the bag of snake meat to one side. Then, he found a wooden box and placed a puppy inside. He looked at the wound on the puppy's neck that was still bleeding pus. In just a short time, the pus had increased and a disgusting smell was constantly emitted. Not intending to buy medicine for the puppy, Ziyue took out a cleaning talisman and activated it. In an instant, the puppy's body was cleaned again and the pus was removed. Seeing this, Ziyue stood up and stopped paying attention. Just as he said before, whether the puppy could come back to life was entirely up to its own luck. Removing the pus for the puppy was the only thing he could do. Then, almost impatiently, he took out a jade scroll. The Thunderfall Technique. I wonder how difficult it is to cultivate the Thunderfall Technique. How much spiritual energy is needed to cast it. Ziyue thought to himself. He placed the jade scroll near his forehead and used his spiritual energy. In an instant, the jade scroll shattered and turned into pieces of useless jade. In his mind, he immediately obtained the cultivation method of the Thunderfall Technique. 1 breath, 2 breaths, 3 breaths. After 5 breaths, Ziyue came back to his senses. The confusion in his eyes disappeared, but a look of helplessness quickly appeared on his face. Even though he was mentally prepared and knew that it would be extremely difficult to truly unleash the lightning descent technique, he only discovered that the difficulty was much greater than he had imagined after truly obtaining the method to cultivate it. By now, Bai Ziyue had mastered quite a number of spells. These included the Fire Spirit Technique, the Spiritual Light Shield, the Grudge Cleansing Technique, and the Spiritual Eye Technique. The core of these techniques was a special talisman. As long as his spiritual energy was strong enough, he could visualize the structure of the talisman in his mind and channel his spiritual energy into it. Naturally, he would be able to cast the technique. Among them, the Grudge Cleansing Technique had the fewest number of talismans, only 5, so it was relatively easy to cultivate. Next, there were 6 talismans for the Fire Spirit Technique and the Spiritual Light Shield. The Spiritual Eye Technique had slightly more talismans, a total of 9. Due to the small number of core runes in the spells, Bai Ziyue was able to cast them without any problems. Moreover, because he had raised the Spirit Fire Technique and Spirit Light Shield to the level of complete control, not only did the rune cores of the 2 magic techniques become optimized, it also allowed him to cast the magic techniques at a faster speed and in a more convenient manner. Moreover, the magic techniques were much more powerful. However, the number of core talismans for the Thunderfall Technique was a total of 48. With Ziyue's current spiritual energy, it was impossible for him to visualize all 48 talismans, let alone channel his spiritual energy and cast the technique smoothly. As expected, the old elementary scholar was right. This technique is not something that I can cultivate now. Ziyue shook his head slightly, but he was not too disappointed. Long before this, he had anticipated this. Even the old elementary scholar, who was already at Mortal Realm level 5, had to deliberately cast the invocation technique to increase his strength in all aspects before he could cast this technique. One could only imagine the difficulty of this technique. Perhaps only when I reach Qi cultivation level 6 can I truly use this technique in battle. Ziyue guessed in his heart as he stepped into the room. 7 consecutive chapters have been posted, requesting monthly votes. Chapter 100. This chapter is for the 9th Hall Master of Soaring Sky. If you want to reward me, I will make up for it in the future. Fireworks is working hard. Please continue to subscribe and support me. Also, I beg for monthly votes. He took out a long wooden box from a long cloth bag. He opened the wooden box, and a total of 12 incense sticks appeared in front of him. Spirit gathering incense, soul calming incense, soul drawing incense. Each of the 12 incense sticks had a unique spirituality that was different from ordinary items. They were firmly locked in the incense sticks. After thinking for a while, Ziyue took out a silver-white incense stick. Soul calming incense. Spirit gathering incense was used to recover one's mind. Soul drawing incense was used to attract ghosts and spirits. This soul calming incense could be used during cultivation. He wanted to test its effects. He inserted the soul calming incense into the slits of the wood on the table. With a wave of his hand, a flame appeared in his hand. This was not a spell. It was just a fire control method that he could use freely after he had reached the perfection stage of the spirit flame technique. Soon, the soul calming incense was lit. A faint grayish-white smoke rose into the air. With a light sniff, Bai Ziyue immediately felt his head lighten. The disappointment he felt from not being able to cultivate the lightning descend art was quickly replaced by calmness. His mind was calm, and his thoughts seemed to move a little faster. As expected, the incense sticks of the burning incense path are unique. Ziyue's eyes revealed a trace of admiration. Then, he quickly placed his thoughts on cultivation. He began to cultivate the heaven-binding hands. Previously, when his master used the heaven-binding hands, his hands were like ink. His control over the weapon and his method of transforming all kinds of force into force really made him gasp in admiration. He naturally became more attentive to the heaven-binding hands. When he started cultivating, he quickly felt that it was different from before. Under the soul calming incense, although his mind was calm, his thoughts were quite active. When he cultivated, all kinds of inspirations were stimulated and stimulated. This allowed him to be in a thoughtful and enlightened state at all times. Unknowingly, when he used the heaven-coiling hand, his hands were like illusions, and his body was like a nimble ape, agile and natural. When the final force burst forth, the air exploded, and it only gradually dissipated after rushing a full meter away. Immersed in cultivation, Ziyue seemed to be unaware of the passage of time. Almost in the blink of an eye, the soul-calming incense had burned out. In a trance, Ziyue finally stopped. A soul-calming incense needs an hour to burn out, which is 1 hour. As for the effects, Ziyue glanced at the ashes on the table before looking at his attribute panel. Spend 954 points of spirit energy to upgrade Heaven Binding Hands to small success. Ziyue did not choose to level up, and a thoughtful expression appeared on his face. He did not know when it started, but the attribute panel seemed to have evolved. It was no longer like before, where it directly consumed the maximum amount of spirit energy to upgrade a martial skill. Instead, it was based on the actual situation of the martial skill he was cultivating, and it would indicate how much spirit energy he needed to upgrade it. Heaven Binding Hands required 1,000 spirit energy to upgrade from beginner to small success. Currently, he only needed to consume 954 spirit energy. In fact, compared to before, he had already saved more than 40 spirit energy. It had to be said that this method of measurement made it much more convenient for him. At the same time, it also allowed him to clearly sense the progress of the martial skill he was cultivating. According to normal cultivation, I can reduce the consumption of spirit energy by 5 to 6 spirit energy in an hour of Heaven Binding Hands, which is equivalent to reducing 1 spirit energy every 10 minutes. But this time, the soul calming incense has decreased by 12 spirit energy, which is equivalent to directly doubling my cultivation speed. A glimmer of light appeared in Ziyue's eyes. He suddenly felt that he had underestimated the effects of the soul calming incense. The effect of doubling one's spirit energy was absolutely shocking. If others were to know that there was a type of incense that could double one's cultivation speed, they would definitely go crazy. However, although the effects of the soul calming incense are good, the price is too high. It's not something that anyone can afford. It's fine to use it occasionally, but if I use it constantly, even if I use it in exchange for glyphs which is relatively more cost-effective, I still can't afford to use it. Zua muttered in his heart, feeling somewhat helpless. A stick of soul-calming incense cost 30 taels of silver, and it only had an effect of 1 hour. He reckoned that even his master, who was the honorable sect master and had a considerable net worth, wouldn't be able to afford such a huge expense. However, through this soul-calming incense, he was looking forward to the effects of the spirit-gathering incense and the soul-guiding incense. In the meantime, he took another look at the puppy's condition and saw that its complexion had improved a lot. Although it still couldn't move, its breathing was clearly much heavier than before. It wasn't like before when it looked like it could die at any time. He took another look at its wound and saw that the pus had become thinner. There were even some signs of recovery. He knew that its life was saved. Next, it only needed to rest for a period of time, and it would probably be able to move again. After thinking for a moment, he took out another cleansing talisman. In addition to the one he used after cultivating, this was the last cleansing talisman he had. However, a single 100-fold talisman was enough to cut out 32 pieces of talisman paper. With his skills, if it was just a cleansing talisman, there was almost no possibility of it being ruined. Thus, he didn't feel any heartache. The azure light once again sprinkled down, and the puppy's pitch-black fur even faintly glowed. At this time, Zua stood up, closed the courtyard door, and walked out. He finally decided to go to the Scorching Sun Gang branch in exchange for the internal refinement technique. As he walked along the street, he could hear discussions about how the Radiant Sun faction had surrounded the Snake Demon and how the ancient Rhyme Pavilion had been destroyed. Occasionally, he would meet people from the government, but most of them were in a hurry. During this time, there were even disciples of the Scorching Sun Gang walking around. Brother Qin, Tong Lao, where are you guys going? Just as he walked to the entrance of the gang, Zue coincidentally saw Qin Xiaoping and Tong Zhan in a hurry. He couldn't help but ask in surprise, "Brother Bai, you came at the right time. We were just about to look for you." Qin Xiaoping's eyes lit up when he saw Zue. "What's the matter?" Zue hurriedly asked. "I'm sure you've heard about the destruction of the ancient Rhyme Pavilion." Seeing Zue nod, Qin Xiaoping continued. "Early this morning, the Lord Guardian directly found the sect master and asked us, the Scorching Sun Gang, to cooperate with the government to arrest the people from the Ghost Head stronghold who attacked the ancient Rhyme Pavilion yesterday. Furthermore, the contribution points given by the gang this time are extremely high. Even if we only find an ordinary member of the Ghost Head stronghold, we'll get 50 contribution points. If it's a small leader, a big leader, or even a leader of the Ghost Head stronghold, we'll get even more. Furthermore, we don't care if they're dead or alive. The people from the Ghost Head stronghold attacked in the middle of the night. Wouldn't they have escaped by now? Furthermore, what's the reason for the government to make such a big decision?" Zue's face revealed a trace of surprise as he asked. The Ghost Head stronghold was actually a taboo existence to the Qinghe town's government. A few years ago, when they tried to encircle and annihilate the Ghost Head stronghold, they failed. After that, whether it was the government or the rich merchants who contributed the money, they all suffered terrible revenge. Because of this, no one dared to suggest encircling and annihilating the Ghost Head stronghold. This was why the other party was so arrogant and dared to enter the town twice in 3 years to annihilate a sect. It's different this time. Today, the Qinghe town city gate wasn't open at all. All the entrances and exits of Qinghe town are guarded by the government and our gang's experts. No suspicious person can easily pass through. As he spoke, Tong Lao's face revealed a trace of a strange smile as he said, "As for why the government made such a big decision, it's all because Wujiang County's new Registrar General, Li Hun Lordly, is about to arrive at Qinghe town. It's said that he came this time to annihilate the nearby mountain bandits. Now, that such a shocking incident happened at this time, and over 60 people were annihilated, it would be strange if the town guard didn't have a headache. Furthermore, even we know that the ancient Rhyme Pavilion is the property of the 2 sons of the Li clan who were left outside. In other words, Li Hun Lord Li's family. Do you think that town guard Sir Yang doesn't know? If he doesn't perform well at this time, he probably won't even be able to keep his official position. Hearing this, Bai Ziyue came to a realization. Naturally, he already knew that Li Hun was one of the two sons of the Li clan who luckily survived the annihilation. Now that the other party was an official, he naturally wanted to take revenge. This wasn't only his intention, but also his filial piety. If others knew that his parents were killed by bandits, and he did nothing, then his position as the Registrar General would be shaken. Therefore, annihilating the bandits became a necessity. As such, the two sides had already reached a point where they would fight to the death. No wonder the Ghost Head stronghold would suddenly attack the ancient Rhyme Pavilion in such a frenzy. Brother Bai, let's go quickly. If we're lucky, we'll have a great harvest this time. Qin Xiaoping suddenly lowered his voice and said. With a thought, Ziyuan knew that they must have found something. However, he still looked at Tong Zhan with slight hesitation. In their small team, Tong Zhan had always been in charge. Let's go. With just the two of us, it's not safe. Tong Zhan naturally knew of Ziyue's concerns and hurriedly said, All right then. Only then did Bai Ziyue agree. As for exchanging for the Golden Cicada technique, he had to postpone it for the time being. Qinghe Town's Wuxiang Harbor. Idling loafers, street peddlers looking for ways to make money, thieves with dirty hands, wanderers, groups of beggars, and the poor local residents. This made the Wuxiang Harbor a chaotic place that normal people would not want to come to. At this moment, Ziyue and the other two were walking on the tightly packed and narrow intersecting roads of the Wuxiang Harbor. They made many turns, which was enough to make anyone who came here for the first time feel dizzy. However, Tong Zhan seemed to be very familiar with this place. He led them deeper into the harbor and did not come to any blockages. Soon, the group arrived at the deepest part of the Wuxiang Harbor outside a relatively spacious house. The person living inside is called Wang Laowu. He has been living here since 7 years ago. Outside, he's just an ordinary peddler, but very few people know that he actually has another name. Tong Zhan said softly. What name? Qin Xiaoping asked curiously. Chapter 101. Face-cutting man. Tong Zhan smiled coldly and said, Face-cutting man Wu Yuan? Qin Xiaoping was shocked and couldn't help but ask. The younger brother of the third chief of the Ghost Head stronghold. Face-cutting man Wu Yuan? The Ghost Head stronghold was near Qinghe Town and had a fierce reputation. Not only were the chief of the stronghold powerful and cruel, but there were also some fierce people who had a reputation in the vicinity that could make children stop crying. And this face-cutting man Wu Yuan was one of them. His strength might not be strong, but his identity as the younger brother of the third chief of the Ghost Head stronghold was enough to make people take him seriously. But what really made him infamous was his special hobby of cutting off people's faces. Because of this, not only had Qin Xiaoping heard of his name, even Ziyue had heard of him a long time ago. That's him. Nodding slightly, Tong Zhan said, The government has made such a big move this time that it might be a bit unsafe for the other people from the Ghost Head stronghold who have just entered Qinghe Town. But for him who has lived here for many years, there is no danger at all. This time, our target is him. In fact, as early as 3 years ago, Tong Zhan had already discovered the other person's identity. The reason why face-cutting man Wu Yuan liked cutting people's faces was because he was good at making human skin masks. And coincidentally, the human skin mask that the other person was wearing 3 years ago came from a traveling merchant that Tong Zhan knew. He knew very well that the traveling merchant had disappeared near the Ghost Head stronghold a year ago, and his fate could be imagined. So, following that clue, he found out the identity of this face-cutting man Wu Yuan. Previously, because of his misgivings about the Ghost Head stronghold and the fact that face-cutting man Wu Yuan's strength was not weak, he didn't act rashly. This time, the government had made such a big move, and the generous rewards from the gang made him immediately tempted. Be careful. Although this Wu Yuan's reputation outside has nothing to do with his strength, he is definitely not weak. When we make a move later, we must use all of our strength immediately. As he spoke, Tong Zhan led Ziyue and Li Wuyo to a corner of the courtyard and leaped slightly. Using the corner of the wall, He quickly leaped into the air and jumped over the 2-meter-tall wall. With a light tap, he arrived at the roof. Ziyue quickly caught up. His body was as light as a swallow, and he did not make the slightest sound. Next was Qin Xiaoping. His lightness kung fu was relatively weak, so he stepped on the wall and made a sound of bricks cracking. Immediately, everyone's gaze turned to him. Qin Xiaoping's face stiffened, revealing a trace of innocence. Fortunately, the sound of him stepping on the bricks did not attract the attention of the people in the house. The three of them successfully leaped onto the roof. They were being careful, even though Tong Zhan had already determined that it was impossible for anyone else from the Ghost Head stronghold to be hiding in the house, and that there was at most Wu Yuan and his 2 men from the Ghost Head stronghold who were disguised as his assistants. They would not be able to bear the consequences if an accident happened. Fifth Lord, it looks like the authorities are serious this time. Should we also make some preparations here? A slightly anxious voice came from within the house. That's right, Fifth Lord. Just now, I've already dealt with 3 waves of people searching for us. Right now, 3rd Bandit Chief and the others still haven't escaped. If we're really found, then we'll be in trouble. Even we might be exposed. Another slightly hoarse voice also sounding rather anxious. It was obvious that this 5th Lord was naturally Wang Laowu. His actual identity was the younger brother of the 3rd Bandit Chief of the Ghost Head Stronghold, the Diamond Body Wu Yong, the cutting-faced man Wu Yuan. As for the 2 people who were speaking at this time, they were definitely the 2 assistants of Wu Yuan on the surface, and their true identities were actually the bandits of the Ghost Head Stronghold. Don't worry, if everything goes well, 2nd Bandit Chief is already on his way to receive them. They just need to wait for a while, and they'll be able to successfully rush out. After this matter is over, we'll definitely turn Qinghe Town into a river of blood. A cold and gloomy voice was heard. That kind of coldness and chill was enough to freeze one to the bone. Hiss! A gasp of cold air came out. Seeing that Ziyue and Tong Zhan were looking over, Qin Xiaoping hurriedly covered his mouth with both hands. However, he was not prepared for his movements to be too big, and a tile was suddenly lifted off. A clattering sound came out immediately after. Who's there? The people in the room were suddenly startled, and a fierce shout came out instantly. Then, a person suddenly jumped up, holding a machete in his hand, and fiercely chopped at the direction of the roof. Whoosh! A large number of tiles were suddenly sent flying, and the entire roof was almost lifted off. Ziyue and the others hurriedly avoided the glint of the machete, and then took advantage of the momentum to break the tiles and directly jumped into the room. The dust fell to the ground, and the sky was bright. The situation in the room also appeared in front of Ziyue and the others in an instant. 5 people. What surprised them was that the people in the room were not the 3 that they had expected, but 5. In addition to Wu Yuan and his 2 assistants, there was also a seemingly old woman and a strong man with bright eyes. At this moment, the one who had chopped open the roof and shouted was the strong man. In an instant, Tong Zhan's expression changed. The Iron Lady, Yu Lihua, Traceless Blade, Yu Fong. Are you also from the Ghost Head Stronghold? These 2 were mother and son, and had a certain reputation in Qinghe Town. They were even more famous outside. Who would have thought that they would bump into people from the Ghost Head Stronghold? Kill them. We can't let any information leak out. The old woman's gaze turned cold, as she said in a cold voice. In an instant, the others took action one after another. Xiaoping, I'll leave these 2 assistants to you. I'll deal with this mother and daughter who are fishing for compliments. Don't worry, Zhang Tao has already gone to inform the gang's disciples. We'll have reinforcements coming soon. Tong Zhan's face turned serious, and he said with a relaxed expression, the so-called reinforcements from Zhang Tao were naturally fake. But after all, he was experienced in Jianghu. Naturally, he would use his means to make the other party hesitate and not dare to pester them too much. Understood. Although Qin Xiaoping's strength was slightly weaker, he was also a smart person. He nodded very seriously, as if there would really be reinforcements coming. Fortunately, Supervisor Gua is in control of everything. He guessed that there must be accomplices from the Ghost Head stronghold in the Five Villages harbor. As expected, we found them. If we can stop them, we'll have done a great service. Ziyue added, and his tone was full of expectation. In an instant, Wu Yuan, the Iron Lady, Yu Lihua, and the others were a little surprised and doubtful. Quick, let's end this quickly. With a shout, Yu Lihua, who didn't intend to do it herself, immediately raised her iron hammer. The Iron Lady was also a figure at the peak of outer forging 10 years ago. But because of an accident, one of her legs was seriously injured. Therefore, she always supported herself with an iron rod with a hammer-like top. This iron hammer was her crutch, but it was also her weapon. The long iron hammer danced, and the wind whistled. It was like the sharp cry of a malicious spirit. A broad and thick long saber slashed out with incomparable speed. The force burst out and formed a ripple like a wave of qi. Tong Zhan's expression was grave, but he was not afraid. Traceless Saber Yufeng was famous, but in fact, his strength was not very strong. He was slightly weaker than Tong Zhan. As for the Iron Lady, Yu Lihua, at her peak, she was indeed much stronger than him. But her leg was injured, and coupled with her old age, her qi and blood were weak. It was unknown how much strength she could display. The saber light rolled and quickly rushed in. The sound of countless weapons clashing was heard. On the other side, Ziyue's figure flashed and blocked in front of Wu Yuan. He said, "Want to run?" "Qi." The air whistled, and a cold light swept past like a strong wind. "Ha!" A deep crack instantly appeared on the wooden wall in the distance. A long whip had appeared in Wu Yuan's hand at some point. This long whip was originally tied to his waist. At this moment, when he suddenly pulled it out, it was really as fast as lightning. However, Ziyue's reaction speed was extraordinary. The moment he dodged the whip, he stomped his foot, and the saber light swept horizontally. Pa! The long whip swept out and directly wrapped around the saber. "Let go!" The thin-faced man Wu Yuan snorted and suddenly exerted his strength. Bai Ziyue laughed coldly. His hand that was holding the saber suddenly spun, and the other party's hand that was holding the whip suddenly loosened. It was as if the whip had been swept away by a barb. Bai Ziyue felt a burning pain in his palm. Ziyue was really not afraid of anyone in the outer forging realm when it came to strength. Wu Yuan's expression changed. He did not expect Ziyue's strength to be so terrifying. Then, the saber light was reflected in his eyes. 18 consecutive saber moves. The saber light was swift and graceful, and it seemed as if the void was being split open. Wu Yuan's expression changed wildly. His body rolled and happened to roll on the edge of a table. He quickly pulled out a small saber from the table. Clang! In the nick of time, the small saber blocked in front of him. Clang! There was a crisp sound of the saber hitting the saber. Ziyue's saber was broken. However, the broken saber body followed the incomparably strong inertia and ruthlessly cut Wu Yuan's shoulder deep into the bone. He frowned. The long saber in his hand was a standard long saber in the faction. It was not very good, but it was still convenient. He did not expect it to be broken by a small saber. "Oomph. I'll see how you fight without a saber." Wu Yuan snorted. He could not help but show a trace of joy in his eyes. Ziyue's saber technique was exquisite and powerful, and its strength was equally terrifying. He suffered a great loss rashly. Now that the saber body was broken, his strength must be reduced by 70 to 80%. He could not help but feel more confident. "Your saber is good, but my broken saber can also kill you," Ziyue said softly and threw out the broken saber without hesitation. The strength in his body flowed continuously. The broken saber seemed to be unable to withstand the strength, and it made the air tremble slightly. Bai Ziyue's figure flashed and appeared beside Wu Yuan at some point in time. He slashed out with his broken saber, and the invincible force wrapped around the saber, causing the broken saber to make a trembling sound. Saber chopping technique. Puff! Fast too fast. Ziyue's speed was fast, but the speed of his saber technique was even faster. Wu Yuan only had time to turn slightly, and he saw the light of the broken saber cutting through his body. The slanted slash directly split his entire body into two. I said that the broken saber can kill you, so it can definitely kill you. With a cold smile, Ziyue looked in the direction of Qin Xiaoping and Tong Zhan. His face changed. Chapter 102. On the other hand, Qin Xiaoping was doing fine. Even though his combat experience was slightly lacking and he was slightly flustered when dealing with the two Ghost Head Stronghold bandits, he still had the upper hand. His swordsmanship was agile and sharp. Wherever his sword pointed, it would always hit the two bandits where they had to defend themselves. This showed the brilliance of his swordsmanship. If this continued, as long as there were no major changes, he would be able to win. On the other hand, Tong Zhan was in an extremely dangerous situation. Every time the Iron Lady's iron hammer hit, there would be a violent roar and a strong wind that could cut one's skin. Once they collided, even though the Iron Lady's chi and blood had declined a little, it was still extremely heavy. Moreover, there was a transmission of force through the vibration of the weapon. After only 3 or 4 collisions, Tong Zhan's battle saber had already flipped and a trace of blood seeped out of the corner of his mouth. Not to mention that there was also Traceless Saber Yufeng, who was not weak. The combination of saber techniques was exquisite. As the long saber slashed across, the force was refined and there was no sound of wind. Instead, it was more concealed. In just a short time, Tong Zhan's body had 3 or 4 saber wounds. Even though he had avoided being hit in the vital parts, he was still bleeding nonstop. No matter how tough his skin was, it was impossible to truly defend against an attack from a martial artist of the same level. The saber light fell silently. Apart from the slight ripples caused by the saber light, there was no sound at all. A hammer, like an unparalleled heavy hammer, whistled through the air. As it exploded, it seemed like a strange wind was blowing. And at this moment, because Tong Zhan was in a sorry state during the battle, he suddenly stepped on a protruding tile. Crack! The tile shattered, but Tong Zhan's body was momentarily stagnant due to the difference in gravity. The attack that he could have dodged suddenly deviated a little. It's over! Tong Zhan's face was ghastly pale. There was a trace of sadness in his eyes. In the Jianghu, he had long been indifferent to life and death. However, he did not expect to die here. In the end, he was still careless. Just as he was thinking this, a broken saber suddenly flew toward him like a bolt of lightning. Clang! There was a deafening sound. The broken saber collided with the hammer. The hammer that was about to land on his head was deflected. Like a heavy hammer, it smashed into a chair. Boom! The chair was smashed into pieces, but it also allowed Tong Zhan to avoid certain death. He raised his saber and blocked Yufeng's long saber. Ziyue, after surviving a calamity, Tong Zhan's heart was filled with boundless gratitude. However, in the midst of the battle, there was no time for him to express his gratitude. The saber light came again, and he could only fight back. What great strength! The Iron Lady Yu Lihua's expression changed as she looked at Ziyue. The impact produced by the whistling sound of the broken saber just now was beyond her expectation. It was almost no weaker than her full-strength attack when she was at the peak of outer forging. Moreover, she glanced at the door from the corner of her eye. The noise of the battle had attracted some people. Even if the reinforcements that by Ziyue and the others had called for hadn't arrived yet, the authorities and the Radiant Sun faction would arrive soon. She became anxious. While she was hesitating, Ziyue's figure dashed and quickly rushed in front of her. A small saber flew past her. Humph! With a muffled groan, Yu Lihua met the attack with her iron crutch. A great force was transmitted out. An inch longer was an inch stronger, and an inch shorter was an inch more dangerous. The iron crutch in her hand was 6 feet long. Compared to Ziyue's dagger, which was less than 3 inches long, she had a great advantage. Even if her opponent was strong, he would be at a disadvantage at this moment. Bang! With a loud bang, the small knife paused for a moment. It actually managed to block the iron crutch's hammer strike. As for the force that came from the hammer, it was instantly neutralized by Ziyue's abundant strength. The Iron Lady's expression changed, revealing a trace of disbelief. She knew very well how strong her attack was. Judging from her opponent's thin and somewhat immature face, he should be quite young. However, not only was he stronger than her, but his outer forging level was also extremely high. How could the force of her hammer strike not injure him? One had to know that Tong Zhan had only blocked 3 or 4 hammer strikes with his saber before the corner of his mouth could not stop bleeding. Ziyue's expression did not change in the slightest in the face of Yu Lihua's shock. He had always shown that he was born with extraordinary strength. Even if others found out that his strength did not match his cultivation progress, they would not be too surprised. He was already known as a genius, so it was natural for his strength to be extraordinary. With a slight turn of the small saber, his other hand quickly climbed over the iron hammer like a phantom. His footsteps were continuous, and he quickly approached the iron hammer along with the movement of his arm. Heaven-binding hands. If he was facing a sharp weapon like a saber or a sword, he naturally would not dare to use the heaven-binding hands, which he had only just learned. However, since it was just a blunt weapon like the iron hammer, he naturally did not care about it since he was far stronger than his opponent. Yu Lihua's expression changed drastically. She felt as if she had lost control of her iron hammer under Ziyue's fiddling. She clenched her fists tightly, and there was a special force that made her palms go numb, making it difficult for her to use her full strength. Let go. The power in Ziyue's hands leaped out, and the iron hammer actually started to spin in the air, directly breaking free from Yu Lihua's hands. This move seemed amazing, but Ziyue sighed in his heart. He was still not proficient enough. He originally wanted to use the heaven-binding hand's unique skills of binding, pulling, pushing, and hitting to achieve this goal. However, in reality, he could only rely on the abundant power in his body to achieve this goal. In fact, he was still very unfamiliar with the real operation of the force. However, just this point alone was enough to shock everyone. The moment the weapon disappeared, Yu Lihua was a little panicked. In her shock, she suddenly saw a fist rapidly approaching, and then it kept enlarging in her eyes. It was so huge that it seemed to cover the whole world. When she felt that the sky had completely darkened, an extremely strong sense of danger made her instantly break free. Her body swayed, and she wanted to retreat. However, it was already too late for him to realize this. Straight linking fist. Boom! The fist fell. The clear sound of bones collapsing could be heard. The Iron Lady Yu Lihua's forehead suddenly caved in, and her brain exploded. She was dead. Mother! Traceless Saber Yu Fang's expression changed abruptly. He did not expect that his mother, who had reached the peak of outer forging, would be defeated by a seemingly ordinary young man. He was terrified, but he immediately made a decision. The moment he blocked Tong Zhan's attack with his long saber, he quickly and decisively turned around and fled with the help of his opponent's force. It's too late to escape now. Ziyue walked at a leisurely pace, and his hands quickly fiddled with the small saber in his hand. Buzz! The small saber trembled slightly, and he gently patted the handle of the saber. Like a sharp arrow, it shot out directly. It was the special technique of the heaven-binding hands. The scene that sect leader Lu Dong showed when he surrounded and killed the snake demon had left a deep impression on him. Because he already had an understanding of the changes in the force, he could see through some things with just a little thought. Although he could not perform it as smoothly and naturally as his master, and the force was extraordinary and terrifying, it was already very good. Bits of starlight flashed, and the small saber seemed to cut through the sky. Puff! The incomparably sharp small saber went straight into Yu Fang's body, and he could not help but stop in his tracks. Then, Tong Zhan quickly passed by and waved his long saber. Puff! A huge head soared into the sky. At this time, Qin Xiaoping on the other side had just finished his battle. The 2 bandits from the Ghost Head stronghold had died one after another and were lying on the ground. As for himself, because he could not dodge in time, his arm was cut. Of course, It could be seen from his excited appearance that he was not seriously injured. Tong Lao, how are your injuries? Ziyue looked at Tong Zhan and asked. Compared to Ziyue and Qin Xiaoping, he was indeed in a much more difficult situation. Not to mention the 4 or 5 saber wounds on his body. There was a long trace of blood at the corner of his mouth. It was obvious that his internal organs had suffered some shock injuries. Although Yulihua was only at the peak of the outer forging realm at her strongest, she had already mastered the tremor force technique, which only experts of the inner refining realm could use. Through the collision of weapons, she could drill the force into the enemy's body and injure the enemy's internal organs. At this time, Tong Zhan had suffered such injuries. Ziyue, thank you very much for before, Tong Zhan said gratefully, and then quickly said, I'm fine. You don't have to worry about me. The battle here has already attracted the attention of many people. I believe that in a moment, the authorities and our sect's disciples will rush over. Xiaoping, go find a sect's internal affairs division's disciples and verify the mission's identity. Ziyue, hurry and search inside. See if there's anything valuable. Don't let others take advantage of us. The two of them quickly nodded and went to do their own things. Tong Zhan began to search the corpses, and soon there was a pile of things on the side. In addition to silver, there were a few letters that represented the Iron Lady and her son's practice with the Ghost Head stronghold. After a while, Ziyue had a large bag of things in his hands. He was like a locust swarm, wrapping up all the valuable items inside. Then, not long after Tong Zhan treated his injuries, Qin Xiaoping came over with a group of people. There were disciples of the Internal Affairs Hall and the gang, as well as soldiers of the government. The disciples of the gang were naturally familiar with each other. Even if they didn't know each other's names, they were familiar with each other. These soldiers were constables who often walked the streets. Tong Zhan had some friendship with one of them, so there wasn't any estrangement between them. This is the Iron Lady, Yulihua, and her son, Traceless Saber, Yufeng. You are... Only now did the constables clearly see the faces of the 5 dead people on the ground. They immediately looked at Tong Zhan with some astonishment. Although it wasn't strange to kill good people and take credit, these two had a reputation in Qingatown. His expression immediately changed. Detective Su, no matter how bold we are, we wouldn't dare act rashly in front of you. Take a look at this. Tong Zhan calmly handed over an envelope. Chapter 103. These two are actually bandits from the Ghost Head stronghold? Aren't they hiding their identities a little too well? Who are the other people? Su Pu quickly finished reading the letter. He was somewhat skeptical and found it hard to believe. This person here is known as Wang Laowu, but his true identity is... Tong Zhan deliberately paused before continuing, Cutting Man Wu Yuan. Really? Hearing this, everyone immediately looked at Tong Zhan. Of course. Tong Zhan nodded confidently. He immediately squatted down and lifted Wu Yuan's face slightly. Immediately, a brand new and somewhat sinister face appeared in front of everyone. This was also the reason why Bai Ziyue and the others weren't worried in the slightest. With the identities of Iron Lady and her son, why would they have to come here and specially meet an existence that was infamous in the Ghost Head stronghold? Who would believe that there was no relationship between the two parties? The letter only confirmed this point. Everyone believed it when they saw the other party's face. After all, the other party was registered in the government. Detective Su had seen him before, so of course he recognized him. I really didn't expect that the 3 of you would be able to kill these people. The 2 ordinary bandits were fine, but the Iron Lady, Yulihua, Traceless Saber, Yufeng, and the infamous Cutting Man Wu Yuan, the younger brother of the 3rd chief of the Ghost Head stronghold, were not weak. Especially the Iron Lady. It was said that at her peak, she was at the peak of external forging. Brother Tong, have you already advanced to external forging of your bone marrow? In the Internal Affairs Hall, a steward named Zhang Zhiyong examined the corpses and verified their identities. His face was filled with shock. If he remembered correctly, Tong Zhan should only be at the level of external forging of his muscles and bones. Even if he had broken through to external forging of his bone marrow, It would be difficult for him to deal with 3 experts who were at the level of external forging of their muscles and bones. Not to mention, the Iron Lady was at the peak of external forging. Could it be with that in mind? He could not help but look at Ziyue. As for Qin Xiaoping, he eliminated him at the first moment. Even though Qin Xiaoping's talent was considered outstanding, compared to Ziyue, he was far behind. If there was anyone who could help Tong Zhan, it could only be Ziyue. External forging of bone marrow? There was still a long way to go. Steward Zhang, you don't have to guess anymore. This time, we are mainly relying on Ziyue. If he hadn't killed Wu Yuan first and saved me from my predicament, old Tong's old life would have ended here. Tong Zhan smiled bitterly and shook his head. Suddenly, Zhang Zhiyong's eyes were filled with surprise. Was Ziyue's strength really that strong? However, he knew that Tong Zhan's words must be true. He immediately felt some admiration for him. The other disciples of the Internal Affairs Division also had some surprise in their eyes. If Ziyue's strength was really that strong, then there would be a lot to see in tomorrow's competition. Originally, most of the others were not optimistic about Ziyue's chances in the competition with Li Yinru. It was not that they looked down on him, but there was a difference of at least 3 years between the two of them. Even if Ziyue's talent was far superior to Li Yinru's, 3 years' time was not so easy to erase. If Ziyue's strength was really as strong as Tong Zhan said, then it would be difficult to predict who would be the outstanding disciple. Ziyue naturally understood the conversation between Tong Zhan and Steward Zhang of the Internal Affairs Division, as well as the flickering eyes of the other disciples when they looked at him. However, his face was as calm as ever, as if he did not care at all. His strength had actually reached the peak of outer forging long ago. Now that he had fused several outer forging techniques together, he had reached the point where his strength was flawless and his strength was as one. It could be said that he had reached the peak of outer forging. Naturally, killing a few people who were far weaker than him did not have much effect on him. If it was not for the fact that he could not reveal his true strength in front of Tong Zhan and Qin Xiaoping, he could have easily taken care of everyone in a few breaths. What he really cared about now was how many people he had killed, how much spiritual energy he had gained, and how many contribution points he could obtain through these people from the Ghost Head Stronghold. In terms of spiritual energy, he had already glanced at them before. Their strength could not be considered strong, but they were not weak either. Together, they had increased his spiritual energy by nearly 2,000 points. Among them, the one who had increased his spiritual energy the most was Wu Yuan. He had increased it a little more than Yu Lihua, who was said to have reached the peak of outer forging. Between them, it was probably because of her qi and blood decline. At this moment, Ziyue's spiritual energy points had once again soared to more than 8,000 points, including the 5,000 points that the snake demon had contributed. Spiritual energy points, 8356. Ziyue was quite satisfied with this number. It's just that this amount of spiritual energy is probably still not enough to raise my inner forging technique to perfection. Ziyue could not help but mutter to himself. Even if he had not been able to exchange for the inner forging technique, he had long since decided to reserve enough spiritual energy points to raise the realm of the inner forging technique. From there, his strength would increase once again. He had been at the peak of outer forging for a long time. Naturally, he did not want to waste time waiting. Based on his understanding of the status panel, the higher the rank of the cultivation technique or martial skill, the more spiritual energy he needed to raise it. Steward Zhang, how many contribution points will we get this time? At this moment, Qin Xiaoping impatiently asked from the side. Ziyue also came back to his senses and revealed an expression of interest. If he could get a lot of contribution points, he would not need to take out enough silver. Comparatively speaking, the purchasing power of silver was still a little stronger. These two are only ordinary disciples of the Ghost Head Stronghold. Together, they can only give you 100 contribution points. As for this face cutter Wu Yuan, in terms of strength, he is only equivalent to a small leader. However, he is after all a fierce person. Furthermore, he is the younger brother of the Ghost Head Stronghold's third chief, so you can count him as a big leader. 300 contribution points. As for the last two, the Internal Affairs Division disciple was slightly hesitant. The Iron Lady, Yu Lihua, and Traceless Blade, Yu Fong, because they had been hiding their identities. Although they were confirmed to be from the Ghost Head Stronghold, it was not easy to calculate their contribution points. With the Iron Lady's strength, she is qualified to be a small leader. However, this Yu Fong, seeing Tong Zhan's expectant gaze, Steward Zhang looked at Bai Ziyue again. Seeing that Bai Ziyue's gaze was still indifferent. Even though he was a little disappointed, he still wanted to form a good relationship with Bai Ziyue. So he said, "I'll also consider you as a small leader. A small leader is 150 contribution points. Two of you will be 300. The three of you will total 700 contribution points. As for how you divide them, that is your own business." As he spoke, the Internal Affairs Division disciple was straightforward. He directly signed and recorded the terms. Next, they only needed to rely on this document to receive their contribution points from the Internal Affairs Division. "Many thanks, Steward Zhang. Many thanks, Steward Zhang." Tong Zhan was overjoyed and thanked him profusely. Then, he pulled Bai Ziyue and Lim Yao Wei. As for the corpses and other things, they would naturally be taken care of by the officials in Internal Affairs Division. There was no need for them to worry. "Let's go. Let's hurry up. Perhaps we can still gain something." After walking a little further, Tong Zhan didn't care about the injuries on his body. He lowered his voice and spoke with a hint of excitement. "Gain? What other gains?" Qin Xiaoping, carrying a large backpack, asked with a puzzled expression. Although the battle this time was thrilling, he was already extremely satisfied with the gains. A total of 700 contribution points. This was several times more than the last time. It was definitely a big gain. Not to mention the cloth backpack on his back and a large bag in Ziyue's hands. If he wasn't afraid of attracting attention, he would have been unable to hold back his excitement and cheered. "Tong Lao, are you talking about the finances of the Iron Lady's family?" Ziyue suddenly asked. "That's right. The Iron Lady's family only had two people, mother and son. Originally, if they were really chivalrous people, even if they were dead, we naturally wouldn't do anything to steal their family's finances. However, now that we have proven that they are from the Ghost Head Stronghold, we naturally don't have to be polite. Why wouldn't we want to gain something out of the blue?" Tong Zhan said matter-of-factly. "If that's the case, then we have to hurry. I just happened to see Detective Su and the others leave quietly. I was a little confused at first, but now that I think about it, they must be heading towards the Iron Lady's house." Ziyue hurriedly said when he heard this. "Then what are we waiting for?" Hearing this, Tong Zhan suddenly became anxious. His footsteps quickened, and he quickly rushed in a certain direction. As his qi and blood surged, the wounds that had just been applied with the golden sore ointment started to bleed again. However, he didn't seem to care at all. His footsteps didn't stop, and he moved quickly. Ziyue and Qin Xiaoping followed closely behind. After the time it takes to burn a stick of incense, the three of them arrived at a slightly quieter courtyard. From the entrance, they could see some of the scenery inside. A grapevine was set up in the middle of the house, and a bunch of green grapes hung on the vine frame. It was a delightful sight. In the courtyard, there were some flowers and plants in full bloom. It was quite beautiful. The Iron Lady is an elegant person. Looking at the environment in front of him, Qin Xiaoping couldn't help but sigh. "I don't have the time to care so much. Let's go in." Tong Zhan snorted. When he saw the door open, how could he not know that someone had beaten him to it? His mood instantly turned sour, and he hurriedly rushed in. Detective Su's speed is not slow. After entering, Tong Zhan immediately saw Detective Su, who had been alerted by the sound of their entry. In a few rooms, there were other constables searching quickly. "Same to you," he said with a fake smile. Both parties tacitly turned around, found their own places, and quickly began to search for valuable items. When Qin Xiaoping saw Detective Su and the others, he was a little angry. However, he could only indignantly follow Tong Zhan and begin to search quickly. Bai Ziyue was the only one who had set his eyes on the deity platform the moment he entered the courtyard, begging for monthly votes at midnight. Chapter 104. On the altar in the Iron Lady's house, there was a statue of a god that seemed to be carved out of wood. The statue had 2 heads and 4 arms. Although it was only half a foot tall, there was a faint sense of pressure that made people not dare to approach it. It was very normal for ordinary people to worship gods in their homes. However, the statue in the Iron Lady's house had a strange and peculiar appearance. It had a ferocious appearance, but there was a benevolent charm to it. It did not look like an ordinary Orthodox god. In particular, Ziyue could vaguely feel a trace of spirituality from the statue because of his strong mental strength. Of course, other than spirituality, there was something else special about it. It was very vague and difficult to distinguish. After thinking for a while, Ziyue casually pulled down a curtain from the window and covered it slightly, wrapping up the strange statue. No matter what, he would put it away first. Damn it, we're late. Most of the good stuff has been taken by them. Tong Zhan had a lot of things in his hands, but his tone was indignant. Although he had a lot of things in his hands, they were all large items that were not very valuable. The fine items that were really valuable had already been taken away by Detective Su and the others. Anyway, we've already gained enough today. Don't worry too much. Ziyue smiled and said, looking at the big bags in Ziyue's hands and Qin Xiaoping, who was pretending to be calm, Tong Zhan's heart skipped a beat. He quickly raised his voice and said, Damn it, I came here for nothing. Let's go. Brother Tong, are you leaving now? At this moment, Detective Su walked out of a room with a few subordinates who were also carrying valuables on their backs. They had a complacent look on their faces. Constable Su, what you did this time is not right. Tong Zhan snorted and said, Yu Lihua and Yu Fong colluded with the Ghost Head Stronghold's bandits and posed a great threat to the safety of Qingatown. I'm just doing a routine check on Yu Lihua and her son's house. On the other hand, you guys have neither official status nor evidence. It's a bit inappropriate for you to appear here, Detective Su said with a proud face. Detective Su, it's a small world. You and I have known each other for 10 years. Who doesn't know who we are? Let's go. As he said that, Tong Zhan turned and left. Ziyue and the others naturally followed. Constable, are we really letting them go? I saw that the expression of the brat beside Tong Zhan doesn't seem right. Beside Detective Su, a constable with his eyes on his face. So what if we've gained something? All the good stuff is in our hands. Besides, the identities of the 2 people beside Tong Zhan are not simple. One is the disciple of the leader of the Scorching Sun gang, and the other is the disciple of their gang's manager. If we really get into trouble with them, we'll be in big trouble. Detective Su shook his head and said, if it weren't for his fear of Ziyue and the others' identities, how could he let them leave so easily with his official status and methods of extracting their bones and marrow? Constable, there are obvious signs that this place has been pried open. Suddenly, a constable walked into the room that Qin Xiaoping had walked out of and suddenly said, Constable Su hurriedly walked into the room and lifted up the wooden plank that had been pried open. A 1-foot square depression was clearly visible. However, at this time, it was already empty. Not good, we've been tricked. Detective Su's face instantly turned ugly. He gritted his teeth and said, no wonder that Tong Zhan left so easily. We've suffered a big loss this time. Ignoring the strange looks from the people on the street and the envious chatter of the Scorching Sun gang members, the group quickly arrived at a bustling mansion surrounded by a 2-meter-high wall. This was Tong Zhan's residence. Aunt Zhong, prepare some good dishes to go with wine. After calling for the kitchen to prepare the dishes, Tong Zhan brought Ziyue and Qin Xiaoping into a bedroom and asked impatiently, how was it? Did you get anything? I only have a statue of God here. Ziyue opened the curtain and revealed the 2-headed, 4-armed statue of a god. He still felt that this statue was a bit strange. Although he wasn't sure what it was used for, he still brought it back. If necessary, he planned to ask the old scholar to identify it. In comparison, the old scholar was more experienced and knowledgeable. Perhaps he could discover something. This statue is so strange. Don't tell me it's some evil god. What's the point of bringing something so inauspicious back? Tong Zhan frowned and said with some dissatisfaction, I just feel that this statue is a bit strange. If you don't want it, I'll keep it for myself, Ziyue said without any change in expression. Nodding, Tong Zhan didn't mind. He hurriedly looked at Qin Xiaoping and asked, "What about you?" He saw the excitement on Qin Xiaoping's face before, so he must have obtained a great harvest. Because of this, he was afraid that Constable Su and the others would notice that something was amiss, so he hurriedly called for them to leave. Otherwise, with his personality, he would have made Constable Su and the others spit out something. Not much silver, 300 taels. Qin Xiaoping deliberately paused. Seeing that the two's expressions didn't change much, he knew that 300 taels wasn't enough to move them. He could only continue. A box of gold. As for the exact amount, I didn't dare to take a closer look because I was afraid that others would discover it. But from the weight of the box, it's quite a lot. As he spoke, Qin Xiaoping hurriedly placed a cloth bag on the table. With a thump, the weight of the cloth bag was revealed. There were several lamps, several pieces of high-quality cloth, a well-made tea tray, and several teacups. Tong Zhan's face darkened. He said, "Why are there all these things? Normally, these things would be worth some money. But compared to the amount of silver that Qin Xiaoping said, they were not worth mentioning at all." Fortunately, when these things were separated, a small box made of high-quality mahogany appeared in front of them. It was about a square foot in size and was made of high-quality mahogany. Not to mention the other things, just this mahogany box was worth at least 10 taels of silver. The room I went to had already been searched by a constable. But my eyes were sharp, and I found that a piece of wood in the room was different from the others. After I pried it open, I found this mahogany box. As he spoke, Qin Xiaoping's face was full of pride. Ziyue and Tong Zhan did not speak. The already anxious Tong Zhan hurriedly opened the wooden box. There were 2 or 3 books on the top layer, but through the edges of the books, they could still see a trace of silver and a trace of gold below the silver. Traceless saber technique, heart-piercing hammer technique, iron bull body refining technique. These books should be the Iron Lady and her son's signature martial arts. Traceless saber technique, when the saber strikes, it leaves no trace. It is indeed a good saber technique. The iron bull body refining technique should be an external forging technique. The Iron Lady had relied on this external forging technique to reach the peak of external forging. But the most powerful one should be this heart-piercing hammer technique. In the previous battle, the Iron Lady's strength was actually not very strong because of the decline of her qi and blood. However, that heart-piercing power still managed to injure Old Tong. As usual, we'll make a copy of each of these 3 martial arts books and keep it safe. As he spoke, Tong Zhan moved the 3 secret martial arts books away. Then, his breathing immediately became rapid. A total of 30 pieces of fine silver worth 10 taels of silver appeared in front of them. The moment these 30 pieces of silver were taken out, the golden light caused them to reveal a trace of infatuation. Gold bars. Each gold bar is worth 12 taels of silver. There are 20 of them here, which means that there are 240 taels of gold and 2,400 taels of silver. Together with the 300 taels of silver here, there are 2,700 taels of silver in total. Tong Zhan's voice changed a little. Even he, who had been the Jianghu for so many years and had accumulated some wealth, did not have 2,700 taels of silver. "We're rich," Qin Xiaoping said with a face full of excitement. In addition to these, there are actually about 1,000 taels of silver. I found them in Wu Yuan's residence. At this moment, Ziyue said with a calm face. Then, he opened the cloth bag at the side. Ignoring the messy chores within, he took out a bulging black bag and untied the string. Immediately, a large bag of silver fell out. Together with these chores and the weapons on their bodies, we should be able to exchange them for about 300 taels of silver. In total, we have 4,000 taels of silver. Tong Zhan was not the only one who was shocked. Even Bai Ziyue, who had been calm all along, was a little moved. 4,000 taels of silver. If divided among the 3 of them, each person would be able to get at least 1,300 taels of silver. Not to mention, they had also obtained 700 contribution points through this operation. If converted to silver, it would be worth 1,400 taels of silver. In other words, they had directly obtained a total of 5,400 taels of silver from this operation. In this case, it's easy to distribute. Including the contribution points, each person will get 1,700 taels of silver. Do you want the silver or the contribution points? Tong Zhan immediately asked. Contribute to me, I just happen to want to exchange for something. Ziyue said with a calm expression. He had originally wanted to exchange for an internal refinement technique. Silver and contribution points were actually not that different. However, if he hastily took out a large sum of silver, it would be too easy to attract attention. It was not as convenient as contribution points. Then I can only ask for the silver. Even if you give me these chores, I don't have any channels to exchange them. Qin Xiaoping could only say so. All right then, these contribution points are all yours. Together with the 300 taels of silver here, you can take them with you later. As for Xiaoping, here are 14 gold bars and 2 pieces of silver worth 10 taels of silver each. Take them well. In addition, if there is anything you want among these chores, you can take them with you. In any case, if I exchange for them, I should be able to make a profit. Tong Zhan was also generous and said straightforwardly, Then I'll take that small knife. This small knife may not be as good as a weapon, but it is indeed hard and sharp. Qin Xiaoping hurriedly pointed to a small knife among the weapons and said, This small knife was actually the small knife Wu Yuan used to cut people's faces. It was incomparably sharp. Previously, he had seen Wu Yuan use this small knife to break Ziyue's long knife. His heart had long been itching to make a move. When he heard Qin Xiaoping's words, he immediately proposed it. Chapter 105. Forget about me. I already have this long saber and this statue. It's enough. Ziyue shook his head and said, Since the saber was broken, he naturally took Yu Feng's long saber in his hand. It had to be said that Yu Feng's saber was indeed much better than the standard long saber he used before. The body of the saber was dark red. Not only was it harder, but it was also very tough. It could be considered a good saber. As for the small saber that Qin Xiaoping could not wait to get, although it was made of good material and was extremely sharp, it was far inferior to the golden thread saber that Ziyue got from the old Xiaocai. The golden thread saber was not only a magic weapon, it was also very convenient to use, but it was a little overkill. If it really collided with the small saber, in the end, it would be the small saber that would break in two, and it would not be the golden thread saber. After eating and drinking to their heart's content, Ziyue and Qin Xiaoping left Tong Zhan's residence one after another. Because he was carrying a huge sum of money, Qin Xiaoping did not say much to Ziyue and directly left. Ziyue paused at the intersection. The strength in his body surged. His blood was like boiling magma, making a splashing sound. Cough. A mouthful of extremely strong alcohol smell directly spurted out. As a martial artist, although he was good at drinking, he did not like the state of being drunk and appearing sluggish. After entering the Scorching Sun Gang, Ziyue directly went to the office and handed over the contribution voucher. Then, under the surprised and envious eyes of the internal affairs disciples, he smoothly received 700 contribution points. 700 contribution points, plus the 150 contribution points I originally had, makes 850 contribution points. It's more than enough to exchange for the internal cultivation method, Golden Cicada skill. I can even exchange for the Vajra glazed body, the advanced internal cultivation technique of the Vajra lockjay tactics. Looking at the number of contribution points in his hand, Ziyue could not help but feel excited. Diamond glazed body was naturally far superior to Golden Cicada skill. This could be seen from the fact that the Golden Cicada technique required 500 contribution points, while the Diamond glazed body required 700 contribution points. In addition, it was an advanced internal refinement technique of the Diamond lockjay tactic. When the two were combined, they could complement each other. Therefore, it was easy to predict what by Ziyue's choice would be when he had sufficient contribution points. Soon, Ziyue arrived at a quiet place in the residence of the Scorching Sun Gang. This was the place where disciples could exchange for contribution points. An old man who looked like he had 1 foot in the grave was sitting on a chair in the main hall. He was reading a book and seemed to be engrossed in it. Ziyue stepped forward and said softly, "Exchange for the Vujra glaze body and 3 bottles of heart protection pills." The old man was startled before he responded with a grunt and received the 850 contribution points from Ziyue. He then took out a book and 3 porcelain jars from behind him. After that, he did not pay any attention to Ziyue. He picked up the book again and read it with great interest. "Thank you, Uncle Liu." Ziyue thanked him and left. He was not worried about whether other people would know that he had exchanged for internal refinement techniques. As a gang, the Scorching Sun Gang naturally knew that the Jianghu was fraught with danger. As a martial artist who did not have secrets, especially when it came to cultivation techniques and martial techniques, they had to be extra careful. Therefore, the disciples who came to exchange for martial arts manuals would not be questioned, nor would they register. As long as the contribution points or taels of silver were correct, they would naturally be able to exchange for the items they wanted without any worries. It was also because of this that Ziyue thought of exchanging for internal refinement techniques in the gang. Otherwise, with his cautious personality, he would rather wait than take such a risk. After all, if his master found out about exchanging for internal refinement techniques, it would be hard to explain. Just as he walked out of the gang, a muffled sound suddenly came from afar. He could faintly hear the sounds of martial artists fighting. It's from the direction of the city gate. Ziyue's eyes were like lightning, and he quickly determined the direction of the sound. Immediately after, he thought of the conversation they had overheard between Wu Yuan and the others. At that time, Wu Yuan did seem to have said that the Ghost Head Stronghold's second chief would personally bring people to receive the Diamond Body third chief, Wu Yong, and the others who carried out the extermination of the ancient Rhine Pavilion. However, the other party's method of receiving them had truly shocked him. Arrogant, despotic, and insufferably arrogant were hard to describe. Perhaps it has something to do with the weakening of the imperial court in this world and the chaos that is brewing. Every time there is chaos, there will naturally be demons and monsters that will appear to cause chaos in the secular world. Ziyue naturally knew that the country's power was already somewhat weak. With internal and external troubles, their control over the various regions would naturally be greatly reduced. Prefectures and counties were still fine, as there were experts who could suppress them. However, the powerful bandits of the Ghost Head Stronghold would naturally not fear the government of a small town like Qingatown. Moving sideways, Ziyue quickly headed toward the city gate. After a few minutes, the city gate was vaguely in sight. However, the city gate was now slightly broken, and there was a large hole that was large enough for a person to pass through. It was obvious that the people of the Ghost Head Stronghold had used some unknown method to smash open the city gate. Inside the city gate, there were more than 10 corpses lying on the ground. Among them were people from the government, and there were even some bandits from the Ghost Head Stronghold. Through the broken city gate, one could faintly hear the sounds of a great battle outside the city. However, it was clear that the battle had already reached its end. Sir Yang, the Green Mountains will not change, and the clear water will continue to flow. You don't have to send us off. A loud voice came from outside the city. However, very quickly, that voice suddenly let out a muffled snort and said, "Guardian Yang, you are indeed skilled. However, you are still far from being able to stop the two of us." Immediately after, the sounds of an intense battle could be heard. Ziyue wanted to approach the city gate to see what was going on, but after a while, he saw Yang Zhongling, who was wearing the uniform of a guardian, walk out from the broken city gate with a gloomy face. Following closely behind him was a group of soldiers with dejected expressions. It seems that the people of the Ghost Head Stronghold still escaped in the end. Beside Ziyue, A person sighed regretfully and said, "Not really. The only one who escaped was the third chief of the Ghost Head stronghold, the Diamond Body Wu Yong. As for the remaining 10 or so strong people from the Ghost Head stronghold, almost all of them are dead." A person next to him retorted, "What do you know? How could those ordinary bandits be more important than the third chief, Wu Yong?" However, this could not be blamed on the Lord Protector. Who would have thought that Vajrabadi Wu Yong would also be able to cultivate inner strength? The second chief's magical sword, Lu Jiping, has even stepped into the third-rate level. In the vicinity of our Qinghe town, he is already at the top. Only a few people can be compared to him. Suddenly, a person who looked like an old man interrupted. "Third-rate? That Lu Jiping is so strong, but he's only third-rate?" The person who was reprimanded did not get angry. Instead, his eyes lit up and he hurriedly inquired, "Looking at your situation, it's obvious that you don't know martial arts. Coincidentally, Su Yi is interested, so I'll tell you about it today." As he spoke, the old man stroked the beard on his face and said with a smile, "Warriors are usually divided into outer forging and inner forging. In Qinghe Town, except for a few people, most of the people who practice martial arts are at this level. But what I want to say is that martial artists at this level are actually all unrated existences. They haven't even stepped through the door of martial arts. Only when they have cultivated inner strength, with the support of inner strength, their attack power will greatly increase, and their strength will also undergo a tremendous change. Only then can they be considered a true warrior. However, even if they have cultivated inner chi, they can't be considered a third-rate powerhouse. Third-rate powerhouses need to accumulate inner strength and start to open up the 12 standard meridians. Warriors at this level can already release inner strength, so they are naturally stronger. Above the third rate, there is naturally the second rate. Second-rate experts cultivate the 8 meridians. These 8 meridians are known as the 8 extraordinary meridians. As he spoke, the old man paused for a moment, and a trace of shrewdness appeared in his eyes. "Why did you stop? Continue speaking?" That person heard the key part and felt itchy in his heart, so he hurriedly urged, "Sui, I've said so much, so I'm a little thirsty. Sigh, I'm old after all, and I can't stand standing here. I need to find a chair to sit down." The self-proclaimed Su Yi smacked his lips with an awkward expression, as if he did not want to speak. "Don't you just want to drink tea? There's a tea house over there, so I'll treat you. Quickly tell me, what are the 8 extraordinary meridians? If this is only second rate, then what about first rate?" That person was already infatuated and hurriedly asked, "Then let's go." Su Yi chuckled and directly walked toward the tea house. This Su Yi caught another sucker. Seeing the two of them walk far away, someone laughed and scolded in a low voice. When Ziyue heard this, he was a little curious and asked, "What? Is this Su Yi a swindler?" "He's not a swindler, but he relies on his eloquence and often asks people to treat him to tea and snacks. Based on his skills as a storyteller in his early years, I reckon that kid will have to obediently treat him to wine and tea for at least half a month." That person was startled and then replied with a smile. Nodding his head, Ziyue's face revealed a thoughtful expression. What Suyi said was not much different for what he knew. Going from the inner refinement realm to the inner chi realm was indeed a threshold, but to say that people in the outer refinement realm and inner refinement realm had not yet stepped through the door of martial arts was a little exaggerated. As for the difference between third rate and second rate, Ziyue did not know as much as Su Yi. He only knew that his master Lu Dong and Elder Nye Yunhao were third-rate martial arts practitioners, and what they cultivated was the 12 standard meridians that the other person spoke of. However, one of them had only cultivated to the 6th of the 12 standard meridians, while the other had already cultivated to perfection. As for whether second-rate martial arts practitioners cultivated the 8 extraordinary meridians, he could not tell. Perhaps it was true, or perhaps it was just nonsense to fool ignorant people. After all, the other person was not a true martial arts practitioner, so his understanding of the way of martial arts practitioners must be limited. he naturally lost interest in following and listening. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.